Klal Yisrael has been blessed with many leaders and many different directions. The Chazon Ish was unquestionably the architect of the outstandingly successful rebuilding of the Torah world in Eretz Yisrael, certainly and directly the Haredi world, but arguably, without question, really, I shouldn't say arguably, without question, way beyond it as well. Last year, on Tishe B'Av, we spent the day focused on a very different personality. A personality who came from a different world, who had a different worldview in the beginning and had a different worldview in the end. Last year we talked about Rav Teichtal Hashem Yikaim Damai, Rav from the world of Czechoslovakia, of the Austrian, Hungarian world of Rabbanos, a person who came up in the world of Munkach, the world of the very, very strong, traditional, anti-Zionist world of Munkach, and then as he was experiencing the Holocaust around him, had his thinking evolve such that the Sefer which he wrote became the textbook for the religious Zionists, the Eim Abonim Semecha. We learned about him, we learned about his Avas Eretz Yisrael, we learned about how he was able to see in whatever was being brought about through the hands of very different Jews, very secular Jews, very anti-religious Jews. He saw in it the development of the Geula, the development of Klal Yisrael moving towards Mashiach, towards its completion. He wanted to work with them. The Chazon Ish's story is very, very different. The Chazon Ish was from the world of Lita, of Lithuania. The Chazon Ish, in his hashkafa, in his outlook, he did not speak about Geula, about redemption. He dismissed, by and large, such talk. Few places we see little twinkles of some mention of seeing what was happening as otherwise, but he explicitly tried to put it away, did not want to speak about it. He was absolutely committed to rebuilding the lost world of Torah and trying to make it that the Yishuv, the developing settlement in Eretz Yisrael, that in it the dominant force, if not immediately, eventually, would be something that was absolutely Torah true. It's a remarkable thing that the Chazon Ish spoke confidently in the 30s and 40s about the demographic trends which we see today. He said, we're a tiny, tiny group now, but we'll keep to it. The growth that's going to come from our community. And he said, I'm afraid if people won't be part of it, it'll dwindle. Eventually, it'll change and will be a stronger force here in Eretz Yisrael. The trends which all the demographic studies everywhere see in the Jewish world. Not with joy, chas v'chalila. We wish the joy was all because of every segment of the Jewish people grew in its commitment and its connection. But he saw the trends and he was committed to build. The Chazon Ish saw very little in terms of partnership with the Zionist world, as we will see. Was very different than Rav Teichtal in this. And his leadership was outstanding. And we have to understand, part of Kibbutz Goliath, part of the assembling of the exiles of the Jewish people, is bringing together all the different Shvatim, all the different values. They all have a place. The Chazon Ish himself, in his world of purity, so he was the inspiration, he was a significant inspiration to a man named Rav Moshe Tzvi Neriah. Rav Moshe Tzvi Neriah was a person who was a student of the Lithuanian yeshivas. He came to Eretz Yisrael. He became very, very attached to Rav Kook. But he was very much a yeshiva man. And he was an outstanding person. Maybe one time we'll have a chance to speak about him some more. But he went to the world of Bnei Akiva, which then was all about farming, about draining the swamps. There was no real element of Torah study there. And he said, we're not going to go anywhere without Torah study. And he created the first Yeshivat Bnei Akiva, Kfar HaRoeh, and that grew into a whole movement of Yeshivat Bnei Akiva. He was very connected to the Chazon Ish. I don't have all the details. I didn't succeed yet in interviewing his family members who can give me more information, but there are things, he's mentioned a few times in the Per Ador, which is the very, very Haredi biography of the Chazon Ish, as someone who attached him. He wrote a booklet on the relationship between the Chazon Ish and Rav Kook, a subject which is very interesting, which we're not going to spend time discussdiscussing today. But he went to create Yeshivot Bnei Akiva, and I'm quite sure it doesn't identify him by name in the story, but at a certain point, it tells the story as follows, that someone who was head of such an institution of Yeshivat Bnei Akiva, which was very different, very, very different than what the Chazon Ish was building, came to the Chazon Ish and he said, he had a question, he's doing this, he has this position. On the other hand, he's been asked to take on a large administrative position that would guide chinuch in that whole stream. Which should he do? And the Chazon Ish said to him, he says, I'm not comfortable advising you. He says, Klal Yisrael has many different pieces that we need. I'm guiding people in one piece. Between this question which you're asking, it's not in mine. I can't guide you in that direction. He respected and he understood. It was his Talmud, Rav Goldwicht, who started the first Yeshivat Hesder. And Rav Goldwicht was a conflicted person in a certain sense. He had some trouble. He had some trouble with it later. Because he said, okay, so this is what we need to do for this group in the community. He was still a Chazon Ishnik, but the Chazon Ish sent him and encouraged him, bring Torah, even where my approach isn't going to be accepted. We need many different streams in the Jewish people. And today, we're going to spend appreciating the profound greatness of the Chazon Ish and the profound importance of his view and what he brought, that we are all incredibly, incredibly enriched from. As is well known, the Chazon Ish, for the vast majority of his life, was an extremely private citizen. Chazon Ish was born in 1878 in Kosovo, in Lithuania. His father was the Rav in Kosovo. The Chazon Ish lived a life of almost complete privacy, certainly until he was 45, but really until he was 55. When he was 55 years old, in 1933, he left to Eretz Yisrael. And when he went to Eretz Yisrael, everything changed. He became, slowly but surely, but pretty, I should say maybe quickly but surely, I don't know how to say it, but over those 20 years until he passed away in 1953, he was much more public. But even in those years, throughout his life, from beginning to end, he never occupied any formal position. He never occupied any formal position. So there were two lives of the Chazon Ish. There was the majority of his life, for which he was a private person, trying to do what a person is supposed to do. And then there were the 20 years of his life in which he was the architect of a world that has a dramatic impact on our world today. That is a critical component of our world. So today, what we're going to do this morning is we're going to learn two sugyas primarily, two subjects. We're going to learn the private Chazon Ish, about what a person is supposed to be or what a person could be. And then we're going to learn the public Chazon Ish, the Chazon Ish of, so to speak, of public policy. The Chazon Ish, the private Chazon Ish, is going to be what we spoke about at the outset. Heichal Hashem Hema. We're supposed to be the people. Hashem rests within us. How do we become that person, that great person? And the public component, of course, is something which we all have to think about. What do you do? The Jewish people return to Eretz Yisrael. What's that supposed to look like? How does somebody build a society based on Torah when a significant portion of the population isn't yet faithful to Torah? When the leadership of that society is either unfaithful or downright hostile to Torah? How do you deal with that leadership? How do you deal with the masses? How do you educate individuals? How do you create the institutions to grow what you want to grow within the land? It's a big sugya, it's a big subject. How do we approach this? So these are going to be basically how we're going to divide this up into two. It's not going to be quite into two. And I spent a lot of time trying to think about how to divide this up effectively, so the morning should be solid and that we should remain engaged. And I'm just going to tell you the way we're going to do it is that this next segment, this second segment, which we're about to do, which is going to focus on the private life of the Chazon Ish building himself up, is going to be the longest of them. I'm going to originally divide it up into separate parts about the different pieces of the Chazon Ish's development, but we're going to try to weave it together in steps as one. And then we're going to move to the Chazon Ish's public strategy, first speaking about the public building which he did, how he tried to build individuals and build a world of Torah, and then how he interacted with the secular society, with the secular Zionism, with the realities that surround him. So let's start again with a picture of the Chazon Ish. So how is it that he spent those years of his life in relative anonymity? It's not that he wasn't capable. During those years, he was publishing volume after volume of the Chazon Ish. He was publishing it anonymously. In the earliest stages, for the first many volumes, hardly anybody knew who this person was. I show you just this, which is the Chazon Ish on Arachayim. It's a hefty volume. There isn't a lot of gaps on the pages. It's not, like one of those with tons of airspace, on the pages. It's dense. This is the Chazon Ish on Arachayim. It's one of 7 volumes of the Chazon Ish's halachic writings that he published. Now, when he published it, it was 20-something volumes, because he did it piece by piece. There's a volume on Arba Chelkei Shulchan Aruch, on each of the 4 sections of the Shulchan Aruch, and a volume on each of the 6 orders of the Mishnah. But there's overlap between them, because 3 of the 4 sections of the Shulchan Aruch he puts in with an order of the Mishnah. So he has a volume on Zroim, on the laws of agriculture, which the Chazon Ish, he came to Eretz Yisrael, and he became Mora D'Shmaitza. There were others who did before him to some degree, but the Chazon Ish studied every aspect of Zroim, all the agricultural laws of Eretz Yisrael, and he coached the frum pioneering communities about how to do it all. So a volume on Zroim, a volume on Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim and Seder Moed, a volume on Shulchan Aruch Even HaEzer and Seder Nashim, the laws of marriage, a volume on Shulchan Aruch Chesed and Mishpat and Seder Nezikin, a volume on Yoredeah, a volume on Kochim, and a volume on Taras. He wrote on the whole Torah, and he wrote densely on the whole Torah. Densely on the whole Torah. Again, this is only what he published, so 7 hefty volumes like this. Now, there are another 10 volumes of tshuvos, of other things which written literally 10, maybe a little bit less. Many additional volumes of Shaltus Chidushim, Shaltus Uksavim, of serious halachic writings of the Chazon Ish. 10 is more. I'm sorry, it's not, that's a little bit of an exaggeration. So he was very, very strong, very, very capable. But he occupied no position, and he occupied no position ever. His brother, Rav Meir Karelitz, who was a very important personality, he was the personal secretary of Rav Chaim Meiser Grodzensky, and then in Eretz Yisrael, he was the head of the Vada Yeshivas, the committee of Yeshivas. He was a very important personality. In Eretz Yisrael, his brother, his older brother, Rav Meir Karelitz, said to people that the Chazon Ish, before he was bar mitzvah, he made a vow that through his life, he would dedicate his life to the study of Torah lishma, Torah for its own sake, which meant never to profit from it, never to gain from it, never to have it as a position. I mentioned last night that the Chazon Ish had a very unusual student, someone who spent 7 years of his life in close contact, many of those years living in the house of the Chazon Ish. The person left the way of the Chazon Ish and remained attached to him in his heart throughout his life. It's a famous Yiddish novelist, Chaim Grada. And he wrote in his volumes, which are filled with cynicism about many, many things, he wrote about Rabbi Avram Yeshaya Kosover. He was a personality that he put into his dramas, which is the Chazon Ish, Avram Yeshaya from Kosovo. He wrote about him with admiration. And he himself gives a legend. It's interesting that some of the accounts, some of the stories about the Chazon Ish are actually taken from things which are understood and corroborated, are found in his works. And he tells about how the Chazon Ish one night, he was studying in the Beis Medrash, a little boy, and then the Beis Medrash emptied out, or so he thought. And he approached the Aron Kodesh. There was a vagrant who was sleeping in a corner of the Beis Medrash. The Chazon Ish didn't know. And he wakes up with a jolt. He hears someone crying. And he looks up and he sees a young boy, 12, 13 years old. And he's praying before the Holy Ark. Okay, this is translation, the way Chaim Grada said it. No one else was in the Beis Medrash at the time, and the recluse sat in a corner between the stove and the western wall. Avram Shaya didn't see him and prayed, Master of the universe, open my eyes that I may behold wondrous things from your Torah. Gal einai ve'abita niflois mitayrasecha. I promise to study Torah all my life just for the sake of study, solely for the sake of study, only for the sake of Torah. I am but a stranger on the earth. Ger anaychi imach. Al taster mimeni mitzvaysecha. Hide not your commandments from me. And this person overheard this and told it to people. That was the rumor about this young man. He cried and he pledged that he would dedicate his life as such to the Torah. And so he never occupied a position. Rav Henkin, Zechrono Livracha, mentioned last night, Rav Yosef Eliyahu Henkin was one of the greatest poskim that came to these shores in the early 1900s. We know him for this little thing, but the calendar that we use in all shuls, everybody calls it the assistant rabbi. The luach, the Beis HaKnesses, was written by Rav Henkin. Our minhagim, our customs, the way we do things in davening, he did them. But he was a goy in Olam. He was a big Talmud Chacham. And when he was a young man, he was heading a yeshiva for a small time in Stayovitz, which is where the Chazon Ish lived for a time. And he said a hesped. He wrote a hesped, a eulogy on the Chazon Ish. And listen to what he says. I was privileged to meet him in 1914 in Stayovitz, when I was there as a teacher in the yeshiva. When I first arrived, I went into the house of the person who was the rabbi there at the time, Rav Yoel Sorotskin. And I saw there a young man who was pacing back and forth. He was dressed like a simple person. He wasn't wearing any kind of rabbinic garb. I asked him who he was, and he told me, I'm the son of the rabbi from Kosovo. He says, what do you do? I'm a shopkeeper. The Chazon Ish, in his earlier stages of his marriage, before he moved to Eretz Yisrael, many years of his life, his wife had a textile shop. She grew up with it in her family. She knew how to run the business. She had a textile shop. And Chazon Ish would help her out sometimes. Interestingly, just a little anecdote which is known, I don't know, maybe there's so many stories, I'm trying to keep myself to things which are clear and verifiable. But one of the stories which is told about the Chazon Ish was that he used to go, especially when things were busy, he would go into the store to help his wife. a little bit, and people saw him, and they realized he was a very special people. And the non-Jewish customers, there were many. It was primarily a non-Jewish market. The non-Jewish customers heard about this special holy man, and they would go to the store so that they could see him, that they could interact with him. And when the Chazon Ish heard that people were coming to his wife's store because of him, he said, "I'm sorry, I can't come to the store anymore, because I don't want that we should be benefiting from my Torah. It's unfair competition with other stores. You're allowed to compete if you offer better merchandise. You can't compete by having a holy man sit in the store. That's not the way you compete." And so he stepped back, and he would only go to the store on the busiest market days. When he went there, and he had one job, and his job was he would measure the fabric, because he was worried that in the busyness that you would do a quick cut of the fabric, and they would be cheating the non-Jewish customers. So he would go subtly and quietly, and he would measure out the fabric to make sure that it was even. This was the pledge. So listen to him. Who is he? I asked him. Rav Henkin said, I asked him, storekeeper, I asked him, are you a kaveh aitin? You study Torah sometimes? And he says, when I have time. I asked him, what are you doing now in the house of the Rav? He said, the Rav summoned me. So I figured, said the Rav Henkin, that he probably had some argument in the business. And the Rav called him about some kind of a din Torah or something like that. Then I found out that this young man was the author of the Chazon Ish. That he wanted to have no benefit from his Torah. Didn't want no benefit from the community. And the reason why the Rav summoned him, I happened to come into the house at the same time, was because this was 1914. And the Rav was now, with all the stuff that was sweeping Russia, White Russia, Lithuania, the Rav had to go into hiding. And before he was going into hiding, he called the Chazon Ish. He said, I need you to stand in for me while I'm gone. This is the only time that the Chazon Ish had something of a position. He didn't want it. He resisted it. But the Rav said, you have to do it. You have to do it. And it was during that time that he did it. And he says, Rav Henkin says that during the half year that I was there in Stuyvitz with the Chazon Ish, I discussed with him many times matters of halacha in all kinds of areas, Erevin, Mikvahs, everywhere. Every place was like a set table before him. The yoga lamed al tamtis kol inin amita shel Torah, and he toiled to get to the essence of everything, to the truth of the Torah, without taking directions in order to say a chiddush, in order to say something novel, something new, something unusual. This is really the next depth of the Chazon Ish. It's not just that he didn't want to benefit from the community. The Chazon Ish, his goal was unimpeachable and impeccable truth. Rav Aaron Kotler, in his hesped on the Chazon Ish, he said there was one person in the world that anybody looked at him and they had no way of saying there's some bias here. All of us, said Rav Aaron, people look at us, they attribute all kinds of ulterior motives to what we're doing. But nobody could do that about the Chazon Ish. He was a person of such incredible integrity and recognized as such. The Chazon Ish, in his method of learning, was completely driven to the simplicity and direct approach to the truth. He tried to follow in the way of the Goyen of Vilna, which was to follow from the sources, to cut it down, to bring it to the truth. He had an aversion to brilliant chidushim, to brilliant ideas, because he knew that many times, when we study, we want to just get enough to be able to say a great insight. And the Chazon Ish wasn't interested in saying something that would be impressive. The Chazon Ish wanted the truth. He wanted to get to the truth. He wasn't interested in the argument. His student tells the story in his books about when he came to town, and people then started to say, oh, there's this person, and he was vacationing outside of the town, whatever, was having a little bit of a break, and people heard that he was there, and they went and they studied something for the Chazon Ish, and he says, one of my friends went and he studied it. He says, oh, I have a million questions. And he went out to the hut in the, near some abandoned quarry where the Chazon Ish was resting a little bit. And he went to see him. He found him resting outside. And he said, I learned this piece from you. And he started asking him and challenging him. And the Chazon Ish said, good questions. He says, the truth is, I don't remember. I don't remember what I said. I don't remember, that passage. And he let him go. Did he not remember because it was such intensity? It could be some of the things he didn't remember, with the same aymek, with the same iyun. But he had no interest in somebody who was challenging him to a duel, that he was going to respond and fight him in the duel. He didn't want to win. He wanted only to be able to arrive at the truth. And he felt doing it in anonymity to the degree possible, just diligently studying in order to be able to do it. He wrote one of the most beautiful, beautiful things, the Chazon Ish, besides for this Sifrei Halacha, the Chazon Ish, we have from him a small sefer which we cited a little bit from, we'll cite from a little bit later, a very small sefer on matters of emunah, bitachon va'od, on faith and trust in Hashem. And we have, it's printed in 2 volumes, but it's 3 volumes of the letters of the Chazon Ish. Chazon Ish, his poetry, his language was magnificent, was beautiful. I mentioned last night, he would get invitations from people who he had a role in their lives to their weddings. He would respond and write a poem of blessing, a poem of aspirations for their beautiful home. His language was magnificent. His letters, someone who's able to read in the Hebrew, the Chazon Ish's igrais, the Chazon Ish's emunah b'tochen, it's so uplifting, so worthwhile. He writes, for instance, to one of his students, Shalom Rab, Ma'od simachtani b'dvarecha hayakarim. Oh, your precious words brought me great joy. Al tisava lechidushim aruchim. Don't seek in your study to have elaborate chidushim, elaborate novelay. Lo koach hachidush chaser lach. What's missing is not the power to create something new. But actually intensify your mind to think the truth, to go straight. The usual chidushim which people say, they deviate, he said, from the truth, more often than not, for the sake of the insight. Says, just plug away, diligently, go, drive for the truth. He wrote this over and over again. Harimaisa yedidi es ruchi, vat sameach es levavi bidvarecha. He writes to a different student. You have lifted up my spirit. You have brought joy to my heart with your words. Asher efilu neged einai b'shavua avar achrei roibam. That appeared before my eyes last week when I saw them. Ki kamta v'alisa, you have risen up. Lisno es pilpule harotzim asher bekalus hadas yisaydasam. You have rejected the light, give and take, that comes from a certain lightheadedness and a certain laziness. And instead you are diligent. V'tismech b'yamin tzedek ba'amal ha'iyun b'higoyin bari v'seichel yosher ladas toras emes. With clarity, in order to pursue the Torah of truth. And he pursued this truth, the Chazon Ish, with diligence. And he pursued it with inspiration. He found the arrival at the truth to be the most inspiring thing. And I read to you again a little snippet from another letter. To a Talmud, to a student. He nurtured them with communications. He sat and wrote these beautiful letters to them. He says, I'm arguing with you. I see you underestimate yourself. He says, I see that without thinking, you're somehow underestimating the goal of true knowledge of Torah. He says a person who merits knowing something of the Torah, okay, he walks around people, he looks like a person, but he says he's an angel. He's an angel living in a mortal world, but he's living in someplace higher because he's clued into the truth. Remember what I read to you before from the Rambam? The Chachamim, the Nevi'im, the sages, the prophets, all they yearned for Yemos HaMashiach was to be able to have a little bit more of a knowledge of Hashem's Torah, a little bit more of a knowledge of Hashem. For the Chazon Ish, that was it. That was the goal. That was what he wanted. That was what intoxicated him. The love of Torah, the search for Torah, the search for truth in Torah. In the later years of the Chazon Ish, when he was in Eretz Yisrael, people authored works, and the Chazon Ish they would send him copies, and he would get the copies, and he would put them on his bookshelf. But he had a pecking order on his bookshelf. Some he put on a shelf that he wanted to look at more, and some less. And someone asked him, and he said, he looks at you look at a sefer, and you can see very quickly, is the person pursuing the truth? Is the person pursuing truth with fear of heaven to be able to understand what Hashem's word is? For the Chazon Ish, that was what it was about. The indeed pursuit of the truth. And he did it. And he did it extensively for all of those years, studying Torah, without people knowing him, without position, without public position, without any of that. He couldn't be bribed by money. He couldn't be bribed by honor of position or by brilliance. I'll tell you just a story, a little story. If someone wants sometime, Rabbi Wein mentions the story. He has 3 lectures he gave about the Chazon Ish. He knew this man in Chicago. I don't recall at the moment his name, but there was a very, very prominent and wealthy Jewish businessman in Chicago who went to Eretz Yisrael and he visited the Chazon Ish. And he saw that the Chazon Ish lived with nothing. So he wanted to build him a house. And the Chazon Ish refused. But as Rabbi Wein said, he didn't become a wealthy, prominent man by taking no for an answer. He says he pushed and he built the Chazon Ish a house. The Chazon Ish wouldn't move into the house until they agreed that they would go to someone who would appraise what rent in the house should be. And he would accept the rent from the Chazon Ish. So they went and they got the appraisal, and the Chazon Ish sends him the money for the rent, and he refused to take the rent. So till the end of the Chazon Ish's life, he lived in the house, and every month he sent the rent check to its tzedakah in the name of the person from Chicago. He didn't want to take anything. He wanted his Torah to be pure. He didn't want to be bribed by brilliance. He didn't want to be bribed by the prominence of having written so many Sforim. Look, at a certain point, the game was up. People knew who he was. But he had the chance, while he did, in order to nurture himself into a Goyen. He was intoxicated by the truth of Torah. Let me just share with you, I want to share with you one other thing, which is just a magnificent little piece. This is a true anecdote. You know that in, I think it was 1917, if I'm correct, was the trial of Mendel Bayless. Mendel Bayless was accused of a blood libel, basically. He was a Jew in Russia, and he was accused in a blood libel, and it became a very big matter in the Jewish world. The Judaism was put on trial. And I've shared with you many times, with some of you many times, that there was a Rab Maza from Russia, from Moscow, who was standing, so to speak, at the trial to defend. He was the chief rabbi of Moscow. He was standing to defend the Jewish faith and the Jewish people from this thing. And Meir Shapira wrote him something that he should have in his arsenal. The Chazon Ish, who, figure it out, in 1917 he was 39 years old. So he sat and he wrote a lengthy monograph about what Judaism stands for and its values. And we all know that the notion of the blood libel is ridiculous, and many wrote about it, halachically and otherwise. The Chazon Ish wanted to offer a window into what Jewish aspirations are, what Jewish life is about. And he wrote a lengthy essay that was meant to be sent to the ministry, to the judge, to know what it was. Some say that it got there, was translated into Russia. Some say that there's no record that it ever got there. I don't know the truth of that, the historical truth of what happened. But listen to what he writes to give them a window into Jewish life. It's worth it for us to read. He says, the Gedolei Torah, greats of Torah, they're living every day, all day, with absolute joy. Their souls are completely overwhelmed by the glory, the beauty of wisdom, the light of its secrets. The love for the wisdom of Torah is in the hearts of its students, the strength of its desire. It's known in works of history. Even our opponents acknowledge that it's easy for us to give up our lives for the Torah, to give up our lives for the sake of the Torah, because we feel more connected to that than to our physical existence. And he goes on to write beautiful, beautiful things. This is found in the end of the second volume of the letters of the Chazon Ish. He writes about how it was just the culture of the Jewish people. He writes about the people of the book. It was the culture of the Jewish people. Learn. Everybody should learn. Children should learn. Adults should learn. People of all ages. The pursuit of refinement and wisdom. That is the way of the Jewish people. The Chazon Ish was studying on his own, and people questioned him about it. Chazon Ish always was in a way encouraging and saying that people have to understand, and what he said here was, of course, a truth that's stated in the Gemara, where the Gemara in Sanhedrin says, what's an example of an apikores? And the Gemara says it's kegoin manda, like one who says, Mayahani lon rabbanan. What do those scholars do for us? They're just studying for themselves. And they don't realize that if not for the Torah, the world doesn't exist. And they're doing a tremendous gift to the world just by being there as a presence, as someone who's there in the world, who has delved and accomplished and built themselves more in the Torah. That's the value of Torah for its own sake. The Torah should be studied, that it keeps the world going, even when the person isn't actively out there going and teaching. The Chazon Ish would even tell those who went to teach. It's a famous metaphor that was used by many afterwards. He said, don't just study something and teach it. Study more and more and more. He says, you can have a little pitcher, you fill it up, and then you empty it out into cups. And the other option is you take a hose, and you have the pitcher, and you have cups all around it. And you have the hose putting water into the pitcher, and it fills it up. And as it overflows, it fills up cups, and then you bring more cups and more cups from all that you're filling up this person with. And he spoke about just grow in wisdom. That's the biggest gift, that the person should be more of a piece of truth, more of an intense student of the Torah. Torah lishma. Right? This is a value of the Chazon Ish, a value, which he taught to many. Right? Eretz Yisrael has, Baruch Hashem, dozens and dozens. I remember I was once talking to my very dear friend, great Talmud Chacham Yeshua Hartman, Rabbi Yeshua Hartman, who's a wonderful Talmud Chacham who lived in Eretz Yisrael for most of his life and is now being Marbitz Torah in England. And we were talking about different things, Eretz Yisrael, Chutz La'aretz. And he says, you can have all your critiques. He said, I'll tell you something. He says, I once made a calculation. He says, I think that in my apartment building in Har Nof, there were more people who knew Shas really well than in the United States. So, I don't know, maybe it's a little bit of an exaggeration. Maybe it's a little bit of an exaggeration. The presence of Torah, it's an article of faith. The Gemara says, no, he's not an apikairos. He's megalapana b'Torah, shaloi k'halacha, even more basic than that. It's a cardinal principle of us to have that. But they didn't leave the Chazon Ish alone. When the Chazon Ish eventually lived in Vilna, he was once in the house of Rav Chaim Leizer Grodzensky, who he treated as a mentor, and Rav Chaim Leizer Grodzensky treated him as a peer, as a friend. Rav Chaim Leizer Grodzensky was there, and the Chafetz Chaim was there, and the Chazon Ish, and the Rav Chaim Leizer said to the Chafetz Chaim, he says, Avram Yeshaya vaksta goyen. He says, Rav Avram Yeshaya is growing into a goyen, a great, great Torah scholar. And the Chafetz Chaim said back to him, he says, well, if I closed myself off and didn't do anything for the community, I could also become a goyen. And this happened. This is what the sort of pressures which the Chazon Ish felt, until, of course, at a certain point in time, he felt as well that it was time for him, that he had to go, that he had to come out. That's the Chafetz Chaim and Torah. So you think, if I ask you right now, and I think this is the picture many people have the Chafetz Chaim, was that he must have been like a hermit. Didn't want anybody to know about him. Stayed to himself to be able to study Torah, didn't want to be involved with anybody. Chazon Ish was a magnificent person in Bein Adam L'Chaverei, in interpersonal relationships. His kindness was legendary. It's known. His door was open to anybody at all times. I want to tell you, if you're a rabbi trying to take a little bit of a break in the summer, it's a very bad idea to learn about the Chazon Ish. The Chazon Ish, the way I worked with Chazon Ish was, again, he was a sickly person. He spent most of his day, it literally reminds us of those of us who had the chance to visit one of his great Talmidim, Rav Aaron Leib Steinman, who was there 100 years old. He was on his bed with a little bench, propping him up sometimes, and people came in to see him. He was sitting on his bed or lying on his bed, and Makabel guests in his simple home, literally like the Chazon Ish. Chazon Ish, day and night. This Talmidim said, one day after a long night of people coming, so the coast was clear, supposedly the student said, okay, close the door. The Chazon Ish got up, went to wash his hands in order to eat a little something. The fellow walks out into the hallway, and there's somebody waiting in the hallway. So he starts saying, Chazon Ish is going to eat something. But he said it was too late. The Chazon Ish noticed. Chazon Ish comes out, brings the person in, sits down with him. I can tell you that my mother, L'Orech Yomim Tovim, told me many times about the one time that she saw the Chazon Ish, when her own grandfather, who lived in Eretz Yisrael, and she was in Eretz Yisrael after she ran away from the war, when her own grandfather passed away and he was taken to be buried in Bnei Brak, and the Chazon Ish came out of his house to join the Levaya for a certain stretch. And she always spoke of that with marvel. My mother told me that her father, my grandfather, who was not of the world of the Chazon Ish. He wasn't of the world of Lita. He was in the Yeshuv HaChadash. Yes, he was in Tel Aviv. And he was an Erlich Yid, a very sincere Jew, a person of chesed. He was from the Hungarian world and was not, but the Chazon Ish's chesed was for everybody. She said her father used to go on a regular basis, would go take a bus to Bnei Brak to go and sit and consult with the Chazon Ish. So she doesn't know all the things that he went to. He knows that he went to consult with him about health issues regarding her father. Chazon Ish was a very significant advisor to people on all kinds of medical issues. It's a subject for itself, which we're not going to speak about. But he was dedicated completely to people. Listen to what the Chazon Ish writes, just a beautiful, beautiful phrase. He writes that a person has a certain yearn for honor. And he says there's something good about it, because it makes the person have a dignity. It's necessary for a person to make themselves complete. Ladas, to know, listen to this phrase, Lechabed es nishmasai b'vididusai, to honor his soul in its privacy, ves habriyos b'chevrasai, and other people in friendship. To be able to have a private self and to be able to be a person with whom others interact. Listen to how Rav Shlomo Wolbe, Rav Wolbe, the famous Rav Wolbe, the famous Baal Musar, who was himself encouraged together with Rav Moshe Shmuel Shapira by the Chazon Ish to go to a backwater called Ber Yaakov to build a yeshiva. He writes in the first volume of the Alei Shor, page Reish Lamed Aleph, if anybody wants to look at it, he writes about differences amongst Gedolei Yisrael, different models, this kind, that kind. He writes about the Brisker Rav and the Chazon Ish, two great personalities who were very different from each other. Listen to how he describes the Chazon Ish. Goyin Acher, Omal min Urav b'Torah lishma. This other sage, from his youth, he toiled in Torah for its own sake. B'tznius nifla borach mikol mishra upirsum. With tremendous modesty, he ran away from any position or from publicity. Darkei b'halimud lagia b'chol sugi ad halacha psucha teichshikul bari v'yagia sichlis atzuma. His way in learning was to arrive to a halachic conclusion through all kinds of serious and diligent toil of the mind, intensely. Hu zochel edvarim harbe. He merited many things. He paraphrases the Mishnah in Avos, v'nikra b'fi kol re'ah v'ohuv. He was called by everybody a friend, beloved. B'mesek tzfasav nichem nidkoim. With the sweetness of his lips, he comforted the depressed. B'tfilois of Paul Yeshuais, with his prayers he did wonders. Mikotan v'ad gadol bo'u lishmaya datay v'etzasai. Young to old came to him to hear his wisdom, his opinion. Ki yagid as Torah b'chol sheila shel haprat v'aklal. He would share Torah wisdom on any question, private and public. Ulekulam ana, he responded to everyone. Af echad lo eshiv reikam. He turned no one away empty-handed. Umesikusai hishtalva bitkifusai shel paisek umanig ador. And his sweetness blended with the strength of someone who led the generation. Sweet. The Chazon Ish was sweet. It's no wonder that a student of his, such as Grada, who was in the opposite direction, he just continued to live with love and admiration for the Chazon Ish. Till after the Chazon Ish's death, he wrote a poem remembering the wonderful relationship of him with the Chazon Ish. His letters, his notes, the way he wrote to people, with such love, with such care. Rabbi Wein says, again, this is sort of somewhat apocryphal, he says, someone asked the Chazon Ish, how do you survive? What do you live off of? And he said, I live off of doing chesed with Yidden. I live off of doing kindness to Jews. Ultimately, he saw that when he came out of his privacy, of his hiding, it was for that, to do kindness to Jews. In one of his letters to one of his students, he writes, "Chaser lecha haregesh shel hishtatfus b'tzar zulascha." It seems to me that you're not sensitive enough to the anguish of others. And the advice to try to address that is to make efforts to do good for others, to save them from anguish. And hopefully the actions will have an impact on your heart. And he says, and pray for other people for their difficulties. Even if you're not praying sincerely yet, even if the person about whom you're praying is a hamoni hedyot ubazui, a person from the masses, simple, undignified. It doesn't matter. Worry about everybody. The Chazon Ish had another person who was really a Talmud of the Chazon Ish, who the Chazon Ish was very, very, very upset at the very end of his life, because they had a parting of the ways on the issue which was very important to the Chazon Ish. And he wrote one of the most beautiful books about the Chazon Ish. The Chazon Ish's upset with him, by the way, was well known. Chazon Ish wrote him a private letter, and a short while later, that private letter was put up by people in a public poster. And he wrote a beautiful book about the Chazon Ish, with tremendous, tremendous love and appreciation. It's just, we'll quote from him a little bit later, something which he says. But listen to what he says, a makar in halacha. You see, this is part of this point, and again, I hope I'm right to be putting this all in one unit, and we're able to still derive from it. But the Chazon Ish, the first part that we spoke about, and the second part was about the Torah and his chesed were intertwined. He did not believe in any ethic that didn't come from the Torah. And he believed that the way he would exercise and needed to exercise compassion and care was completely based on the Torah. So Rav Kalman Kahana brings an amazing ruling from the Chazon Ish that he says is the halachic basis, in a certain sense, for his attitude towards this. What's the ruling? Okay, you'll forgive me, I'm going to say it to you, it's Tishe B'Av, I'm going to tell you this halacha for the sake of the incredible way of thinking of the Chazon Ish and the insight which it teaches you about ethics. Everyone knows that there's a prohibition of lifnei iver lo sitein michshol, misayeh yedei ovre aver. You can't put a stumbling block in front of the blind. That means a halachic stumbling block. You can't support someone who's doing an avera. You can't help someone to do an avera. You can't pass a bottle of wine to a nazir. And the Mishnah teaches that you also can't give a plow to a person who's suspect of working during Shemitah. You can't do it. You can't give something which is clearly a tool for doing an aver. What about sofek lifnei iver? That means that the person's asking you for something, and the person's not careful about Shemitah. You know he's not careful about Shemitah. And he asks you for something, for a certain kind of a tool. But that tool could be used for something which is forbidden, or it could be used for something which is permitted. Is that going to be a problem? Is sofek lifnei iver a problem? And it's clear that the din is that it's not a problem. And the Chazon Ish has a problem with the fact that it's not a problem. Why isn't it? I mean, if the person might be doing it, then you may be an accessory to the crime. Why are you allowed to give him something when there's a distinct possibility that it's going to be used for an avera? Listen to the Chazon Ish, Shvius Siman Yud Beis. Why were they makil? It should seem you should be careful. Safek deraisa, you should be machmir on a safek. Mishum di'imbanu lachmir b'sfeikos nami nasa michshol. He says because if we're going to be machmir on these doubts, we're going to be creating a different michshol, a different stumbling block. Shemnimna chesed v'darkei chayim v'sholem me'atzmeinu mehem. Because we will be holding kindness and peaceful connections from ourselves and from them. These are people who we should be giving life to, who we should be caring about. So what's going to happen? It's Shemitah, we're worried they're going to do something wrong with it. They ask to borrow anything, they ask to borrow a jug, maybe they're going to use it to water plants. They asked to borrow something. Look, part of it is we have to maintain relationships. So there's a goal that we shouldn't help people to do averis of shvius. But there's also a goal that we should help people to have ava v'achva, and there should be love and goodwill. And remember, this is from the person who's careful about shvius to the person who ignores the halachas of shvius. But hey, there's another goal here. You hear what he's saying? if you're not sure that it's an Avera, remember that there's also a cost in neighborly relationships with this Avaryan. Shoklu Chazal bepeles ad kama sheyesh li'isnaig l'kainsam limshech yedenu mehem v'shlo nigrei michshelim yoser gedolim lahem v'lonu. It says Chazal, with their wisdom, they weighed and they said, if it's something which is outright going to be used for an Avera, even if they'll be upset at you for not giving it to them, do that. It's okay. They'll understand. You don't have to help them with something which you feel is wrong. But if it's something which isn't outright an Avera, give it to them. It's important to maintain relations. And this is characteristic, by the way, as well, of the Chazon Ish and his interaction with the secular population. Because you will hear later about how strong he was with the leadership, and at the same time you will hear how amazing and understanding he was and counsel being with the population. I want to mention one more thing here from Rav Kalman Kahana. He says in his book about the Chazon Ish, he says many people speak about all of the Torah which he had, all of the chesed which he did. He says, but what they don't emphasize enough was the relationships which he had. How he didn't just do kindness to people, but he built incredible relationships with people. And he quotes something which I read last night for those who were here, and I'll read it again because it's an amazing thing. But the Chazon Ish wrote to his estranged student Chaim Grada, after the longest and most difficult wait, I finally found out your address. I found out where you are. And because of the tremendous yearning, the love of a person, remembering our relationship of the past, memories which bring me such joy, filled with feelings that I don't have the words to express, I will write briefly and I wait for your response as soon as possible. Chazon Ish had relationships with people. He wasn't hit and run chesed. He wasn't a person who was just meiser nefesh. He had his door open. People would come and, the psychologist is in, right? I'm going to give you my answers and then you're going to come and you're going to go. He built relationships with people. Relationships. And the Chazon Ish felt that this was part and parcel of Torah. Chazon Ish felt there was no separation. Ein ha-Torah begeder chachma regila. Torah is not a regular discipline of wisdom. Ela atzmius hanefesh ha-Yisraelis. It's the essence of the Jewish soul. One who does kindness with another person lifts up his soul, and therefore he'll be able to learn Torah better. Rabbi Avram Gerechovsky, a Talmud Chacham, a great Talmud Chacham who was a student of the Chazon Ish, formed by the Chazon Ish in a great sense, he wrote that the Chazon Ish, Talmidim asked the Chazon Ish encouraged people to do chesed. They said, you always put such an emphasis on learning Torah, we should interrupt Torah to do chesed. Said the Chazon Ish, the chesed that you do makes the reservoir for the Torah to go in. If there's chesed in you, if there's goodness and refinement in your personality, that's what makes the Torah go in. And I want to conclude with one last component, a critical component, one which I think it's very, very important for us to dwell on in this world of the Chazon Ish. As we said, the Chazon Ish did not believe in handling things piecemeal. He had an overall view of what man was supposed to seek, what man was supposed to be like, the ethic that man pursues. And his overall view was that the task of man was to have wisdom overcome impulse, to have the lofty overcome petty desire. A person has to not be a creature of desire. They have to be a creature that seeks greater things. That's the key to chesed, to kindness. That's the key to Torah, to opening ourselves up to wisdom. It's the guide to what wisdom truly is. And so the Chazon Ish had another piece of himself, and that was pashtus, simplicity of Kedusha. Here, I want to share something with you. This is a hergish, this is a feeling, and I think that many of you will likely share it. So we're here. We're mourning over the Beis HaMikdash, something we never saw and experienced, but we try to imagine. we're talking here about a great person. When you have a chance, when I have a chance to be in Eretz Yisrael, everything about Eretz Yisrael is beautiful. The chance to be in the land of our forefathers and so on and so forth. Everything about the current Eretz Yisrael is beautiful. What's most inspiring, what we mourn over on the flight back from Eretz Yisrael are people who we encounter, who the driving force in their lives is faith, Torah, goodness, and their material well-being is like nothing. And we meet these people all over the place. In Eretz Yisrael, right, there are more in one apartment building than there are in all of America. Not talking here even about scholarship. Talking about pashtus, to be simple and to be satisfied. That was the Chazon Ish. You think the Chazon Ish's students were all just the ones who were studying in Kollel and listening to the thing of Torah Lishma. Yes, that's a part of it. But that was part of an ethos of a way of life. And that way of life was pursuit of the Spirit and forget about the other stuff. Forget about the other stuff. There's a person named Eli Paley we met recently, a very, very fine, very, very wonderful person and successful person. And he's created a think tank, an institute, with all kinds of secular researchers and academicians in order to research and study the Haredi population, to come to understand their needs, their economics, their educational needs, everything, to serve as a source for informed data, to interact with government on policy matters. Very special, very unique project. So they did a study on poverty. And the numbers, of poverty in the Haredi community are very, very high relative to the rest of the population. So the secular academicians who did the study, however, they did two things. Those numbers, they don't need to do a study. Those numbers are out there from census information and tax bureau information, everything else. They know that the raw numbers. They did a study about poverty as experienced. In other words, you can ask people how much money they make and how many children they have in their family, and you'll come out with a number called whether they're considered poor or they're considered wealthy. Then there's another thing. You can go to someone and say, tell me something. How do you deal with poverty? How are you experiencing poverty? And the numbers in the Haredi community who feel that they're poor are much, much smaller than the other population. And the reason is, okay, there's a Mishnah, Ezu Ashir Hasamech B'Chelkai. The reason is they're happy, satisfied to live simply. Of course, there are parts of the Haredi community where that isn't learned, but go to the Chazon Ish's stomping grounds. Go see now the tens of thousands of families just walking around, people with the simplest appearance, the most beautiful smiles on their faces. I want to mention something. Last year, at this time, I mentioned someone who's here today who had given the gift of life on Erev Tishe B'Av, Rani Pacino, who had given a kidney on Erev Tishe B'Av. And we have someone else from our shul gave a few right after Shavuos, Rabbi Yaakov Majeski, and we have another person who just did now again during the 9 days. Chana Friedman gave a kidney. The gift of life, unbelievable, incredible gift. And I encountered once an article about an organization in Eretz Yisrael, just going through its own struggles right now, called Matnat Chayim, the gift of life. And they wrote a story, in a regular Israeli newspaper, they wrote a story about a couple from Bnei Brak named Reuben, who gave their kidneys. And it's just such a beautiful, perfect description. You look at the picture of them, the lady allowed her picture to be in for this article in order to be an example. yeshivish couple, with light on their faces, simple, smiles. A year before, the husband gave the kidney, and the next year the wife gave a kidney. These are people who are simple. So they like shrug it off. They say, "Look, we were raised to give." A person's a Rabbi in a yeshiva. He goes to a daf yomi shir, at night, and he heard from one of them, from Maggid Shir, that his cousin or brother got a kidney from someone, and then he heard about this gift of life. He lost his father when his father was 50 years old. His father died of the complications of kidney stones. So when he turned 50 and he's hearing this, he says, "Baruch Hashem, I'm fine." So he wanted to give the gift of life, and he gave it. Didn't want to know who he gave it to. The person who he gave it to wanted to know who he was. He didn't want anybody to feel obligated to him. A year later, his wife gave. Who did his wife give? So this family has, excuse me, I'm not going to take the time to consult my notes to remember exactly. They have something like 11 children, but they only have 6 of them at home. 5 of them are married already. So what did they do? So they brought in a child who needed a home. The mother decides to give a kidney, and Min HaShamayim, who does she end up giving the kidney to? To the aunt of this child, just straight from the list, to the aunt of this child who's living in their house. And they feel so validated. To me, looking at that, Baruch Hashem, we have here in our seat of plenty, we have people who are ready to give the gift of life. But the description of the arum, of all that's around it, they said, "Oh, you brought a girl into your house and now you're giving her a kidney." He said, giving a kidney, I'll give the kidney. I won't feel good for a couple of weeks and then I'll be fine. Raising somebody in your house, that's a bigger thing. If you would ask them about raising somebody in the house, they would put that down too. But it's a feeling, and you know what I'm talking about. When we come back from Eretz Yisrael, when we come back from meeting such people, we say, "Ay, where is it?" These are the Talmidim of the Chazon Ish. These are the Talmidim of the person who lived in a simple hovel. When the world wanted to give him, I shared a story yesterday at the Shabbos table that I just saw early yesterday morning, that a person came to the Chazon Ish, a wealthy person came to the Chazon Ish and saw him, and he says, "Look, I want to give you money. You're living so simply." He says, "I don't need anything." He says, "But an hour ago, a couple that just came from Europe, Holocaust survivors, came and they have nothing. Could we give it to them?" That was the Chazon Ish. Not for himself, but for others. So I want to end this piece by focusing on that, and by something which I would suggest that we really, really need to work on. And that's the following. We're supposed to be a holy people. Kedoshim Tiyu. A holy people means people who focus on higher things, like the Chazon Ish talked about. That give. And don't just give and be yaitze and then go and be unholy ourselves. But a holy people. And I share with you one of the favorite quotes that I have from Chazon Ish. This is for decades. From the Emunah B'tochen Aleph Tes. Kasher zocha seichel ha'adam lirois amitas mitziusa yisborach. When the intelligence of man has the opportunity to see the truth of Hashem's being, miyad nichnas bo simchas gil ein kates. Immediately he's filled with an infinite joy. V'nishmosei ne'ima olav, and his soul is sweet and pleasant to him. And his imagination combines with his intelligence, lachsos b'noam Hashem, to see the sweetness of Hashem. V'chol tanugei b'sorim chamku avru, all physical pleasures, it's as if they fade. And his soul, misatefes b'ktusha, is wrapped in holiness. Uki'ilu pirsha migufa achur, it's as if it's separated from the clouded body. U'mishomeshes b'shmei shamayim, and instead it goes and it floats around in the heavens. And when a person rises up in these values, a new world opens up to him. It is possible for a person in this world to experience moments where they are like an angel. There are things which are the greatest and deepest pleasures. We often repeat what the Rambam wrote at the end of the laws of Purim, that a person should invest the most of his money on Purim, not on the meal, not on mishloach manos, but on gifts to the poor. Not because it's a bigger mitzvah to give to the poor, but because, says the Rambam, if you want to rejoice, if you want to have true joy, the greatest joy is not by what you take for yourself. The greatest joy is in bringing happiness to aniyim and midukoyim. My friends, what scares me is that we have on the one hand a study that shows the strength of the Haredi world. Let's call it the frum world. We might make less money than others, but we don't need it. We're happy. We don't feel poor. That's a world. And then we have our world, another part of the frum world, which is, excuse me, way, way, way too involved in materialism. Way too involved in materialism. The Chazon Ish saw one package of making great human beings, and that is to be creatures who pursue truth and that which is right, rather than pursuing the things which satisfy ourselves. The Chazon Ish's simple house and table was the Chazon Ish who studied Torah, was the Chazon Ish whose door was open for everybody. And yes, I am not suggesting that each of us, like the Chazon Ish, wear, when we're 75 years old, during the weekdays, the hat that we wore for our wedding, the jacket that we wore for our wedding. It's okay. You can get a new one every 10 years for sure. We don't need to be there. But we don't need to be where we are. We don't need to be where we are. We're investing far too much of our energy, of our emotion, of every resource and every kind of resource that we have in something which is distracting us from the purity, from the truth, from goodness, from others. We'll end with the story of Bnei Brak of 1940. And then we're going to say the Kinnos of the Asar Arugei Malchus, the Kinnos of the 10 martyrs, great people whose physicality disappeared as their spirits soared. In the early 1940s, the Ponevezh Rav went to try to rebuild Ponevezh. He was in Eretz Yisrael, his family, his community was being destroyed, and with the urging of the Chazon Ish and the help of the Chazon Ish, he got a portion from a very big, close Yedid friend of the Chazon Ish, a wealthy man, Rav Yaakov Halpern, to build a yeshiva. And they went there on one day, a few people. There was a little table with a soda and kichel, and they dug the first beginnings of the footings. And the Ponevezh Rav, they say it, of course, it's a certain exaggerated prose, but the Ponevezh Rav, his tears were enough to mix with the sand to create the cement. And the Chazon Ish said, here's something great is going to be built. One of the great Gedolim in Europe was the Beis Ephraim from Brode. He met once Rav Chaim Volozhin. He says, I don't understand. You built a yeshiva in Volozhin. It's the greatest yeshiva. We built a yeshiva in Brode. It's not successful. What's the difference? Tell me. He thought he would hear something about the educational program. The Rav Chaim Volozhin said to him, says, what did you do on the day that you founded the yeshiva in Brode? He says, on the day we had it, nobody went to work. We had streamers. We had bands, we had music. It was a yom tov for the city the day that we opened the yeshiva. Rav Chaim said, on the day that we opened Volozhin, we had a fast day. We davened. We cried. Simplicity. That's what will build the institutions of Jewish life that will ensure our survival. That's what will build the individuals of Jewish life that will ensure our survival. Let's all become a little bit more Talmidim in this way of the Chazon Ish. I ask you to turn to read about the Kedoshim Vasarugei Malchus, Kinnos Chaf Aleph. It's on page 248 in the art scroll, and on approximately page Lamed Gimel in the paperback Kinnos. Next, yes. Azel v'noy nadirei Torah balei treisin b'mishnah v'gemara yibayei koyach hamoleh b'Torah damam nishbach v'nersagura Inam Kedoshei Arugei Malchus Asara Valelani Beichi Aveni Nigra Zois Bezochri Yazak Nemara Chenas Yisrael Kli HaKodesh Nezer V'Yatorah Toirei Lev Kedoshim Meisu B'miso Chamura Yadu Gairo B'Bishoin Lachere Berura Kinfoil Gairo Rabban Shimon Poshat Zavora Yuvachok Nigzira Gzeira Rabban Shimon Chazara Egmoin Lorgoi B'Nefesh Netzura Mizera Aroin Shal V'Vakosho Lifkoi Sal Ben Agvira Notav Reishoin Sonei Al Akuvoi Sov Neira Teiro Sominov Alinov Ufiv Pi B'Avo Gmura Anov Yomar Pea Miskaber B'Teira Pisoim Nigdiso Lov Misa Mishuna V'Chamura Tivolav Shites Roishoi B'Sara Schira Ki Am B'Yoiroi Amru L'Nafshech Shechi V'Navoiro Rosh HaPoishei Sigel Limkoim Tfilin Mitzvahs Paro Tzak Tiyoko V'Nizdazoi Lo Mi'eretz Yispoiriro Mi'acharov Eviu Es Rabbi Akiva Oiker Harim Techanan Zubizu B'Sforo Circlets B'Sorai B'Masvek Shel Barzeli Hishtabro Yosan Ishmasoi B'Echad V'Askoi Lomro Ashrecha Rabbi Akiva Gufach Tahar B'chol Minei Torah Ben Bavo Rabbi Lacharov Heviu B'Shivroin Levi Azoro Nerag Ben Shivim Shana B'Dei Arura Yoshev B'Sani Soyon Akiva Chazid B'Mlachtoi L'Maro Rabbi Chanina ben Tradi Nachra Makil Kilois B'Tzion Shara Yoshev V'Doresh Sefer Torah Imai V'Kifu B'Chavlei Zemayram Esor Yitzisu B'Hem Ukrachu B'Sefer Torah Sukin Shel Zemer Nichu Aliboy Shlei Hamus Meheira Chassid, Rabbi Yesheva, Vazoi ve'argu amamayros raku v'shlichu laklovim v'leikbar b'kfura yotzesa baskelalov sheliniach klum mitayras meishel l'shamra v'acharov Rabbi Chutz b'spiyoi mefra oifa peireach nisraf avel piv kivamdura tzadik Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua b'achroino Neherag b'mat kiro yom erev Shabbos yozman kiddush Vayikadesh vayikro cherev shelfu olav leinichu b'chaim legamra Yotzesa nishmasoi b'varo elayim yetzer b'tzor tzura Kain v'chein oisifu b'nei avol yanois b'gora b'skilo sreifo ereg v'chenek Miuchal l'sharo noiseres mimenu yechlu aroyois sepezura chazei atunfa v'shoy katruma Torfu aye v'akfiro yetiv adonai v'lo yisifoid liyasra Ameitz berkayim koishlois chelek Yaakov u'Moshiach b'yisoro L'tzedek yimloich melech yoymar sholmu yemei evlech Yoroi nisa v'neilech. You can keep your place there in the book because the next kinna we'll do in a while is going to be the following kinna chaf beis. As we mentioned earlier, in discussing the Chazon Ish, we speak about the personal, internal values of the Chazon Ish, how he built himself, his vision of what a person is supposed to look like. A tzaddik, that's the Shechina. A tzaddik, like the Harugei Malchus that we read, the personification, the Heichel Hashem, the human presence of the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in a human being. We've tried to paint something of that picture. The Torah, the truth, the kindness, the relationships, the simplicity, the single-minded and overall focus on higher things, as it is possible, as the Chazon Ish said, to be like an angel on this earth, if at least for some moments. Now, at this point, we're going to move to the public work of the Chazon Ish. So the Chazon Ish is the architect of a growing and new community in Eretz Yisrael. As we said, it's filled with questions. The Jewish people return to Eretz Yisrael. What's the land and country supposed to look like? How does somebody build a Jewish society based on Torah when so much of the population and the leadership is either indifferent or antagonistic? How do you educate individuals? How do you build the individuals and institutions? So in this first portion, we're going to focus on the last piece. How do you build the individuals and the institutions? And read and learn about the Chafetz Chaim's efforts in this area. So a few minutes of the biographical sketch and context. Important to know and important to set the stage to understand what's happening here. When the Chazon Ish left Vilna in 1933, a letter preceded him that was written by Rav Chaim Ozer Grodzenski, who was the unquestioned Gadol Hador, really, almost unquestioned. And he wrote, using the language that the Gemara uses about Rav Kahana, Ari Ola mi Bovel. A lion is going up, is making aliyah from Bovel to Eretz Yisrael. That's what Rav Chaim Ozer wrote. He wrote to Rav Kook, he wrote to the Gedolim of Yerushalayim, all the Gedolim of Yerushalayim. Ari Ola mi Bovel. A lion is coming from Bovel. He wasn't, the Chazon Ish, even though his wife wouldn't be able to have a store in Eretz Yisrael, he would survive from the selling of his Sforim at the price that he set. He wouldn't take $1 more. He still didn't want any kind of a formal position. He wanted to fulfill the vow he made in his youth. It's very interesting if you look at the letters. There's 3 volumes of letters of Rav Chaim Ozer Grodzenski. So, the shortcut for these things is you look in the index for where the Chazon Ish shows up. If you look at the letters of Rav Chaim Ozer with the Chazon Ish, there are 2 broad categories of the letters. One is where the Chazon Ish is consulting with Rav Chaim, where the Rav Chaim Ozer, who was again the acknowledged Gadol, famous Gadol B'Yisrael, 15 years older than the Chazon Ish, was consulting with the Chazon Ish, whether in matters of halacha or of community guidance, referring to him as my friend. And the other are letters where he's writing about the Chazon Ish, a lot of which are somebody saying, okay, we need people to be the head of this Bezdin. We need the person to be the rabbi here. Or we need someone to be on the council of Torah sages. And Rav Chaim Ozer writes, it would be great, Rav Aaron Shaikrels, but he'll never take it. In his tzidkus, in his piety, he won't agree. Forget about it. That's the way it was. That was who he was. Why did he go to Eretz Yisrael? So, the easy answer is that the Chazon Ish felt that the mitzvah of going to Eretz Yisrael, of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, applied today. And the Chazon Ish was very clear about that. He felt that was still a mitzvah today. He felt the consensus was with the Ramban. He said it's known how much the Chafetz Chaim wanted to go to Eretz Yisrael, yearned to go to Eretz Yisrael. And the Chazon Ish himself, who went in 1933 but contemplated going already back in 1923, the Chazon Ish then at that point didn't go because he couldn't make a living. He said, I know the mitzvah is limited as the Tshuvas Mil Tzedakah, which is brought in the Pischei Tshuva. He alludes to it in a letter. And so he was writing to a dear Chaver of his who lived in Eretz Yisrael, asking about the economic situation and how likely it would be that they would be able to make a textile shop work there, because that was the business that the family knew. In 1933, he went anyways. He said, what do I need anyway already? What do I need to live? And he figured that what he needed to live, he would be able to manage just by selling his Sforim. The Chazon Ish yearned, like Moshe Rabbeinu, for the mitzvahs of Eretz Yisrael. Rav Kalman Kahana, who was part of Poalei Agudas Yisrael, and was centrally involved in the establishment of agricultural settlements from people, most notably the famous Kibbutz Chafetz Chaim, which is still very much functioning today. So he was someone who interacted with the Chazon Ish on the matters of the community and on the mitzvahs of Liyas Baris. Rav Kalman Kahana wrote many Sforim, which are used to this day, beautiful Sforim, on the mitzvahs which are dependent on the land. And they're a very important repository for the practical psukim of the Chazon Ish. He would bring the Chazon Ish to Chafetz Chaim. He writes, parenthetically, relevant to what we were talking about at the end of the last section, that what the Chafetz Chaim, the Chazon Ish, besides being very excited by the opportunity to see and to teach how to implement the mitzvahs which were dependent on the land, he was so taken by the simplicity of the lifestyle of the people there in Chafetz Chaim. He found it pure and lofty because they got by with so little. But the Chazon Ish loved Eretz Yisrael. People came to him and asked shaylas. Someone asked him a shayla about Yom Tov Sheni, he's planning to go back. Chazon Ish said, how could you be planning to go back? Someone asked him a shayla about coming to Eretz Yisrael. He said, look, I can't tell you. Like he says, he knows that there are issues of parnasa and things like that. He says, but if you come, I'll be overjoyed. If you come, I'll be overjoyed. So Chazon Ish wanted to come to Eretz Yisrael. But it's whatever we're going to say here is to some degree speculation. And there's a lot out there, a lot of speculation. I should have said it at the outset. I want to say it now and acknowledge it publicly, is that there's a Professor Binyamin Brown in Eretz Yisrael who wrote quite a large book. There's a very, very dense book about the Chazon Ish. It's an academic study of the life of the Chazon Ish. It's filled with, it's a tremendous resource for somebody who wants to learn about the Chazon Ish. It'll take you no longer than 3 years to read it from cover to cover. But it's a fantastic resource, thorough resource with galvanizing tremendous sources. Anything about this is to some degree speculation. But I would like to try to suggest, and not everything that is being said here, much of what is being said here is based on other sources. Chazon Ish in his letters writes not only about about going to Eretz Yisrael. He writes about what he saw as a possible prohibition of leaving Poland. Why? Because Poland was a Makom Torah. It was a place of Torah. Not leaving Poland to go to Eretz Yisrael. The Chazon Ish as always was based on the Halacha and the Gemara. And the Gemara says that the same way it's usher to leave Eretz Yisrael, it's forbidden to leave Eretz Yisrael to go to Bavel, it's also forbidden to leave Bavel to go to other lands. Why? Because Bavel has an aspect of Eretz Yisrael to it. Why? Because that was the place where there were the yeshivas, that was where the place of Torah. Eretz Yisrael has an organic holiness. Bavel had a developed holiness because of the Torah that was there. The Chazon Ish wrote in a letter when the Chafetz Chaim was still alive to someone who consulted with him about going from Poland to America. He was not happy about him going to America. He says, I don't even know if you're allowed to go to America. To leave Poland, which is a Makom Torah and which is where the Chafetz Chaim is, he viewed it like leaving Bavel in the time of the Gemara. But you can go from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael, so it's not a halachic question on him. But you have to understand something else which was happening there. And that is that by the time the Chazon Ish left Europe in 1933, it wasn't just that, the rise of Hitler to power. It was the disintegration internally of Jewish life. Chazon Ish left after a bruising battle in Vilna. A few minutes ago I said the Rav Chaim Eizer Guzensky was the unquestioned leader of Torah Jewry in his time, and I said almost unquestioned, because ironically there was a bruising battle over who would be the official rabbi in Vilna. The Chazon Ish, the Rav Chaim Eizer, or someone else. And the someone else was someone who didn't begin to approach Rav Chaim Eizer in his greatness, but it was complicated times. I mentioned last night that by the time the Chazon Ish left Vilna, actually in the mid-20s, when this happened, the Jewish Community Council of Vilna, which was considered the Yerushalayim of Lithuania, had 25 members. Of those 25 members, 6 were religious. Combination of Aguda, Ichud, and Mizrahi. 6 out of 25 in the Jerusalem of Lithuania. In the city of Rav Chaim Eizer, in the city to which all the yeshivas went into exile later, at the time, 6 out of 25. And Rav Chaim Eizer's leadership of the Jewish community was challenged by elements not that were aligned with different parts of the community, with different parts of the Jewish community. That was indeed, it's noted as the first major public thing that the Chazon Ish got involved in, which was to work to make sure that Rav Chaim Eizer would be considered the Rav of Vilna. When that battle finished, however it finished, with some sort of like middle ground, the Chazon Ish left. The Mokum Torah, that was Poland or Lithuania or Vilna, was fast becoming not a Mokum Torah on its own strength, without any enemy yet looming. And he went to Eretz Yisrael, and his goal was to make a Mokum Torah. And this is not speculation. I'll tell you a story. When I read this story, I shivered. So Chazon Ish came to Bnei Brak. He decided not to live in Yerushalayim. Bnei Brak wasn't Bnei Brak. Bnei Brak was nothing. A small little town, but it was of the new yishuv. It was of the new settlement. It wasn't the old. It wasn't the old settlement. It wasn't Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim was a city which was filled with sages and scholars. The Chazon Ish said, "They don't need me there." He was ready now, at the behest of the Chafetz Chaim, who said that he had to come out of himself and do for Klal Yisrael b'shas mechansim pazer. At the time when people are keeping themselves, you have to go and do. Anybody who could do, the Chafetz Chaim had to do. He went to do. And again, he went and he lived in he rented a room in somebody's house, no position, but people already knew who he was. Rosh Hashanah, the first Rosh Hashanah, Tov Reish Tzadi Daled, Rosh Hashanah of 1933, going on 1934. Chazon Ish walks in on Rosh Hashanah morning to the small Navardik yeshiva, the Beis Yosef, which was the yeshiva then. Before Panovich, there was no Panovich, there was no Vizhnitz, there was no nothing. The yeshiva that was there in Bnei Brak, he came in to daven with the yeshiva. And he just went there to daven like a regular person. He wanted to daven there with a minyan. And they went over to the Chazon Ish before Tkiyah Shofar. They said, "Would the Chazon Ish please speak to us before Tkiyah Shofar?" Chazon Ish never gave speeches. He never gave speeches. He didn't speak at the Knessia Gedola. He didn't give speeches. He wasn't a rabbi. He wasn't a Rosh Yeshiva. He didn't give speeches. He sat and he studied Torah and he spoke to people privately. He never gave speeches. He said no. They said, "Please." He said no. They said, "Please." He says, "Would you learn something with us, at least?" So he said, "Okay, we'll go to a side room and I'll learn something with you. So he went to a side room. A few people would come with him. The whole Beis Medrash packs into the side room. What does the Chazon Ish learn with them? He learns with them a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma said that one time I was traveling along the way, and Paga bi Adam Echad, and a person encountered me. And he said, would you like to live amongst us? And Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma said no. He said, we'll give you all the money in the world. Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma said, somebody could give me all the silver and gold in the world. Ve'eini dor ela b'makom Torah. I'm only going to live in a place of Torah. Someone give me all the silver and gold in the world, I'm only going to live in a place of Torah. Chazon Ish read the Mishnah. And then he read it again. And then he said again, Ve'eini dor ela b'makom Torah. Ve'eini dor ela b'makom Torah. I'm only going to live in a place of Torah. And that was the Chazon Ish's drasha before Tkiyah Shofar and Rosh Hashanah. Why is that so riveting? He left the place that had previously been Bavel, the place of Torah. And he came to a place, the new Yishuv, which was not a place of Torah. A place which was swept by trends that were they were blowing people, the few people who were in the Beis Medrash, out of the Beis Medrash. And the Chazon Ish there gave his goal, and he shared it with everybody there, that it should be their goal. And that was that they were going to make a place of Torah. They were making a place of Torah. And don't think that the Chazon Ish was only thinking about making Bnei Brak into a place of Torah, the Bnei Brak that we know it today. He certainly intended that it should be a strong place of Torah. But he wanted it every place. It's well known that people would refer to a makom chiloni, a secular place in Eretz Yisrael, and the Chazon Ish would interrupt him and say, Ein makom chiloni ba'aretz. There's no such thing as a secular place in Eretz Yisrael. He needed to make a makom Torah. Eretz Yisrael was not going to just have its organic holiness, because it's the land of our forefathers. It was going to be a holy land in the here and now. So what do? How do you make that? How do you create that? The Chazon Ish, excuse me for using this metaphor, it's the only way I can think to convey it that will make the proper impression. The Chazon Ish was a scout. He looked everywhere for possible talent. The talent meant someone who might be able to be enticed to learn Torah. And he set about to cultivate that talent, to make an all-star team. Not elite, as broad as possible, as much as possible. Perhaps the most striking thing about the Chazon Ish, is the investment which he made in individuals one by one by one. Anyone who he came in contact with, who was a young person, to come to be able to grow them, to be able to make them into a person who would be able to learn Torah. He worked, he tried to build them into something. I read to you some of his letters. We could spend hours going over his letters. They're so beautiful. The encouragement, the nurturing, the positivity, the demonstration of concern and love. Can you imagine getting a letter about your personal well-being from a Gadol b'Yisrael? From the Chazon Ish? Could you imagine? what that would do for you? How that would change you? You know how many stories there are of people who were despairing? The Chazon Ish heard about a boy who was not doing so well in yeshiva. He was getting ready to leave the yeshiva. He said, he sent a message to yeshiva, just bring him here. Just bring him here. I want to meet him. Chazon Ish would sit him down, say, oh, tell me what you're learning. The person felt no success in his learning. And Chazon Ish would sit and learn with him for an hour, for 2 hours. He would ask him, he would tell him over a piece that someone was embarrassed to face on an exam, failed an exam where there was a question which was asked. Chazon Ish said, oh, there's a question, you already asked this question, let's learn, we'll learn an answer to the question. And they learned for a couple of hours, and he gave them the answer to the question. He says, okay, now you'll go back, you'll have the answer to the question. And then come back afterwards and tell me how it went. You understand, things like that. It's mamish, asher tifachti v'ribisi. He nurtured them one by one, to be engaged, to be involved. I want to give you an example. It'll shock you. You might even, part of you might be turned off by it. But this was like such a success, an amazing success. There was a young man who came from a fine. His father himself was a Rabbi in a yeshiva. He lost his mother when he was a young man, young boy. I don't know exactly how old. Chazon Ish took him into his house. He stayed in his house. He went to a yeshiva ketana in Bnei Brak. He stayed in his house. And he was a good boy, engaged in learning, involved in learning. He would come home at the end of a long day, exhausted. He wanted to go to sleep. Chazon Ish saw something in him. He said, no, don't go to sleep yet. Come sit at the table and learn some more. He's exhausted. His head is falling off. He says, come, sit at the table and learn some more. He came, he sat at the table. 3 minutes, he was out. Chazon Ish gently helped him, picked him up, brought him to go to sleep. You know, it's one of the things which they say about the Chazon Ish, and again, here you have to know, as they say, they don't say these stories about you and me, but maybe there's a little bit of exaggeration in the story. They say the Chazon Ish, we know, he learned mamish to exhaustion. They say the Chazon Ish had a calculation of, he stopped learning when he had enough strength to be able to make it to his bed. And once he miscalculated and he fell asleep on the way to the bed. Right? The question, of course, on the story is, one could ask, how could the Chazon Ish miscalculate? But the other question is, the Chazon Ish really, most of the time, he learned on his bed. He never, Chaim Grada, who grew up in his house for 7 years, said that the Chazon Ish didn't go to bed from Friday night to Friday night. He fell asleep for a little bit, a couple hours. You've heard these stories about others. Chaim Grada, the cynic, the one who left the way. That's what he wrote about the Chazon Ish. He lived in his house. So this young man, the Chazon Ish knew he couldn't keep learning much. He was going to put him to sleep a few minutes later. But he said, let him fall asleep, pushing himself. Let him do a little bit more. This young man was Reb Meir Tzvi Bergman. Some of you may know who he is. Reb Meir Tzvi Bergman ended up being the son-in-law of Rav Shach Zichrono Livracha. Reb Meir Tzvi Bergman is a prince of Torah. He's a Talmud Chacham. He's a magnificent person. He used to come to Baltimore. He was a very close friend of Rav Schlanger Zichrono Livracha. And he was a magnificent person. I want to just mention a word which I look at his sefer. He has a sefer Shari Oira. I just saw this Shabbos morning a word which he says in the second volume of the Shari Oira, which is just so this. The Gemara says that Rav Shimon Bar Yochai went into the cave. Right? Remember the story of Shimon Bar Yochai went into the cave. So his son-in-law was Rav Pinchas ben Yoyer. And when Rav Shimon Bar Yochai came out of the cave, I won't be able to find exactly the source, but when Rav Shimon Bar Yochai came out of the cave, So he had spent, all those years, 13 years in sand and so on and so forth. His skin was cracked and had wounds everywhere. And Rav Pinchas Ben Yair says, "Woe unto me that I see you this way." And Rav Shimon Yochai said, "Fortunate for you that you see me this way. Because before, when I went into the Mara, I would ask a kasha, and you would give many, many answers. Because now, many responses, whatever, many questions on the answer. Now, when I say something, when you say something, I could bring many, many things to support." So Rav Meir Tzvi asked Akasha, he says, "I don't understand. Rav Pinchas Ben Yair, the son-in-law of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, was more brilliant than Rav Shimon Bar Yochai before he went into the cave, and Rav Shimon Bar Yochai only passed him once he went into the cave." So he said, "No." He said he was greater than him before, he was greater than him after. But Rav Pinchas Ben Yair didn't realize how great Rav Shimon Bar Yochai was before. So Rav Shimon Bar Yochai would ask something, Rav Pinchas Ben Yair would say, "Nah," and he would give answers. He would give responses, Rav Shimon Bar Yochai says. But now he says, "Ashrecha shrisani b'kach," now that you see how I toil for the Torah, now you understand what it is. Now you understand, and when I teach something, you respect it, you approach it differently. The Chazon Ish was growing someone who would also fall asleep over a sefer, who would also give everything in the pursuit of truth. The Chazon Ish would visit the schools, the elementary schools that he helped establish in Bnei Brak, others, any cheder that would ask the Chazon Ish to come. He would come and he would give them Kinnos. He would test the boys. He would talk and learning with the boys. So very nice, right? Ceremonial. You could see pictures of the Chazon Ish leaving, all the boys waiting outside. He went to talk and learn with the boys. Always, after he talked and learning with the boys, what did he do? He sat with the Rabbi and he spoke to them about each one. About each one. He says, this one is doing well, just keep doing what you're doing. This one, I think he needs a little bit more of this. This one seems sad, depressed, build him up. This one, it looks like he's learning too hard, encourage him to go out and play more. Those were the things that the Chazon Ish, that the Chazon Ish did. He wrote letters with advice. Again, I'm just leaving out a ton, of course. I'll just read you this one letter because it's just it's amazing. Shalom B'Rav Yesha. This is a letter with 4 points about a young man who's a student in a yeshiva. Number 1, he's still a child. He's still young. So he hasn't yet shaken off from himself the dew droplets of youth and the laziness of youth. And the lack of seriousness accompanies him wherever he goes. There's nothing bad. There's nothing bad. He's still young. You have to understand, what you're seeing is youthful immaturity. He's not bad, number 1. Number 2, he's open to words of improvement. He's open to words of rebuke. He's open to words of encouragement in Torah, in fear of heaven. However, when he takes it, it's still fleeting. He's inspired, but it doesn't take root. Eino kovas adayin b'kirbo diro kavua. So you need to speak to him more regularly, so that it sticks. Number 3, you cannot speak to him strongly. Only soft-spoken methods with this young man. And number 4, if he doesn't know the shiur, if he doesn't know what you taught, it's because he didn't work on it. It's not because he's not capable. He's perfectly capable. And he ends and he says, the worst thing you could do for him is, because he's not performing so well, is put him down to the lower class. He's capable, he's just still a little bit immature, and he needs encouragement and regular encouragement and positive things. That's the letter from the Chazon Ish about some young man in a yeshiva. Don't send them away. Don't even send him down to the minors. Just keep him, cultivate him, nurture him, and help him grow. That's how the Chazon Ish did it. That's how the Chazon Ish built Bnei Brak. He encouraged people to build a yeshiva, a cheder, and bring in students and nurture them and build them. You know, the Yerushalmi Kanoim got very angry with the Chazon Ish. Why? He was not a Kanoi relative to the Yerushalmi Kanoim. Why? Because he built this cheder and they taught in Hebrew. And they didn't like people speaking modern Hebrew. They taught in Hebrew, not in Yiddish. Chazon Ish liked a thing in Yiddish, and later he helped develop also a cheder in Yiddish, but he created a place in Hebrew. So I want people to come here. He says, you know, you're fighting, it's like the general who's fighting the battle on yesterday's front. That was the famous mashal that people still use in different things. That was the Chazon Ish's mashal. He says the battle for Hebrew is over. For whatever reason, there was such a battle, which is not a discussion for today. But he did it. He wanted to make it welcoming, nurturing, and he encouraged making such things all over the land. The Chazon Ish, when he saw someone who grew and was capable, he sent them to other places. He sent them to build a cheder far away from Bnei Brak. To build a cheder in a town where there wasn't anything yet. He sent out Rabbanim to be Rabbanim, people who he felt already they could manage all over the place. And he pushed. Somebody said, I don't know, me, my family, you're not ready. He says, what right do you have to think about yourself at a time like this? The Jewish people need you. And he sent them out. And a person said, but what's going to be with the chinuch for my children? He says, yeah, that's a big problem. What's going to be with the chinuch for your children? So now I know you're going to be nagea b'davar. You need chinuch for your children. You're going to make sure that there's chinuch for your children there. He pushed and he pushed. There's no secular place in Eretz Yisrael. He didn't accept that there should be any secular place in Eretz Yisrael. This is what he did. This is how he built. One by one, and grew communities one by one. Every year on Tishe B'Av, I make an appeal for something that helps in the process of bringing us out of the Churban. I want to do that this year, no exception. Binyan ha'aretz b'Torah. What the Chazon Ish wanted was one thing. He wanted to transform every place in Eretz Yisrael into a place of Torah. I had the privilege, together with a few people, a couple of months ago, to be in Eretz Yisrael and to spend a day with a person who is fulfilling the mission of the Chazon Ish today. There's a Jew named Rav Shlomo Ra'anan. He's a wonderful person. He's a Talmud of Rav David Soloveitchik. And he is the most warm, engaging person in the world. Maybe that was another exaggeration for today. He's an extremely warm and engaging person with such Avas Yisrael. He has an organization called Ayelet HaShachar. He goes community to community. You know those secular Shomer HaTzair kibbutzim that were built without a shul, without Yom Kippur, without Brisson, without Kashrus? So he goes one by one and establishes relationships and helps them build shuls. Today, 160 something. Hey, he sent me last week an advertisement which they made. Brilliant. It's summertime. People are traveling all over the country. So he made a big list of, I don't remember exactly, 160 places, listing 160 places. People are traveling in the north. Especially in the north, there's a lot of people going, there's a shul here, the minyan's at such and such a time. Most of the time the shul doesn't have a minyan. But there'll be all these tourists. And they're going to come. And there'll be a shir. So he's saying this is the opportunity for them to interact. And he says, and if they have a minyan for 2 weeks in the summer, they're going to have a minyan in Elul. And they're going to have a minyan Rosh Hashanah. He takes couples, Torah Dika couples, has them move as one couple to a community where everybody's secular and just be there and live there. And slowly but surely, we met these couples. It's unbelievable, it's beautiful, exactly what the Chazon Ish wanted, maybe again with a 21st century flavor. He does it with just avas habriyos, with a connection, with understanding of people and responding to their thirst. No hard sell. Just making it there, making it available. He's doing this work of building Eretz Yisrael. And so, if anyone wants to participate, our chevra we undertook, we're trying to give or raise to support such a couple. It's about $24,000 a year. We have raised the majority of it, but not nearly all of it. To participate, you can make a check or give a donation to the BJSE charity fund. Some people will go around with baskets if somebody wants to give something right now. And this was it. But this was the positive effort of the Chazon Ish. Part one of his public policy, rebuilding Klal Yisrael one by one. And I want to just spend 1 minute to just segue into the Kinnos we're about to say. Kinnos Chav Beis, which is not just a break between speeches. Kinnos Chav Beis is about the times, crusades, times when there was Mesiras Nefesh of children who gave their lives al Kiddush Hashem. Children who gave their lives al Kiddush Hashem because of where they were going to go. If there's one thing, I say the most outstanding thing for the Chazon Ish was how each child he viewed as the precious treasure which they were. In Sefer Bamidbar, in the beginning of Sefer Bamidbar, the Ramban writes that when Moshe Rabbeinu counted the Jewish people, 600,000 Jewish people, what did he do? Each one came before Moshe and Aaron. Writes the Ramban, Moshe and Aaron laid their eyes on each one of those Jewish people, and someone who he raises, looks at them and says a prayer for them and a bracha to them. Imagine what happened to that child. Just psychologically imagine what happened to that child. Imagine how that uplifts. And my friends, Chazon Ish did it. Children who were studying Torah were rare. Now, you got to make my day, to get into my institution. We have 5 classes or 4 classes or 6 classes on every level. It's so much harder, right? You write a letter to a Gadol b'Yisrael, right? What do you want from him, right? He's getting 500 letters a day. If you get a one-word answer, you should consider yourself fortunate. Imagine living in the house, sitting and learning. You go to Gadol b'Yisrael to see him, and instead of having a minute, he says, come, let's sit and learn. We'll learn for a couple of hours, and then do me a favor, come back next week, we'll do it again. It's hard to be a gem when you're as many as the sands of the sea. And if there's another lesson to derive from the Chazon Ish, it's let's treat each child as the gem that they are. Let's nurture each one. Let's hear those lessons, those 4 points that the Chazon Ish said about one child, and realize that it's probably true about almost every child. As we read about the Mesiras Nefesh of Yaldei Yisrael, the gems that are Jewish children, let's think about our own Jewish children. Again, it's Kinnos Chav Beis, the 22nd Kinnos, page 254 in the Art Scroll, and page Lamed Hey in the paperbacks. Hacharishu mimeni v'adabeira v'yavar alai mo chamas azak v'shoyed l'chosher chen shamayim v'tzikas liruchiv lo yuchal edoyma Keileda efer shafi yeshoyma mitzved marese v'koinein b'nima divrei shagoysa yitchu chayoma Sibti al adosi asher nitna l'shamarid b'tzichi v'ayima v'kol nihi arima eich shavas masois v'arvo simcha Obanim haru v'choroish karcha v'chazakon gedua v'akolei v'anacha Mios niseirer Goyas leirei shucha Silo abirai ogeyoiz miftecha V'suloi sayu v'achurai Nosach bin sicha v'roish kol chutzois Nivlason kasucha Ilalai v'tapai nechshavu ketzoin tivcha Lilo alzois v'dimasi alecha Yasfu elai devuyei tzoin Nidachol diarbois abechil arin tzvacha Lilu shamayim ezaki adamorid B'tzichi v'ayima V'kol nihi arim Limtzu v'tzaku mara Supai tamrur heagdu B'chavura Koil kachoylot Tzara Kemafkiro yisoin Rualada Sepizura
Olei moikinik zerok zerok b'chori afazam v'yevro v'nisvadu b'frishus u'v'toro v'kadei shem agadol v'anoiro v'ish ezochiv chizku be'ezro lidavek b'yirot Torah b'likiroi alavoi dozoro v'loi chasu gever ugvirabonim tziras tifaro avol azru gvura yiseiro laloi imroish v'likroit shedrom Ve'ilei moi dibru v'amiro lo zochinu legadelchem la'Torah nagivchem k'oi lo v'yaktorah v'nizkeim v'chem li'oirah Hatzfuna min kol v'aluma ori l'sichi v'ima v'kolni ori maziskimu gedolim u'ketanim V'kabel bi'avodim shoichein mi'oinim uzkeinim d'sheinim v'rananim ema yutchilo nidoinim Yotzu likrasam azei ponim v'nergu amoinim v'nisarvu b'dorim parshadoinim V'avoiz asher hoyu rachmonim nepchu lachzor kayenim V'efisu alavois v'albonim v'mishagoyro l'ololoi rishonim Hunishchat b'chalafois v'sakinim u'vachurim alei toilo emunim Heim lo chachu afor kisaninim V'akalois l'vushois shonim u'lafois b'zrois chasonim Nutachois b'cherev chidoinim Zichruzois ka'al adas nevoinim v'al techeshu me'arbois kinim V'asfidu al chasidim v'agunim asher tzolu b'mayim azeidoinim V'zeicher zois nafshi agum orin b'sichi v'ima v'kol nehi orimam Torah chigrisak v'spal shilaforim Evo yochid asi lochu mispei tamurim al toifsei mishoitayich barsei machmoirim Malochai v'chai v'layich b'mayim adirim Archei marochech mi'ashrei adurim Mefanchei tzfunayich u'megalei mistoirim Mi yekatze b'gvois u'mi yisateis be'orim u'mi yiforei kavoyois u'mi yisoreit shivorim Mi aflin zirois u'mi yisoreit shivorim Mi aflin zirois u'mi aroich nedorim Mi yishadein ma'amekech u'mechatu Ikorim u'mi yilchai milchamtech v'yoshuv l'asherim klei milchama avdu v'naflu giboirim Ashrei maskilim karakia zoyarim kim b'mnuchai shaloim nachu yisharim Oy vavoy shoy vashevel noy sorim lidivas neves vavolim vitzirim Khyeinen ayim tsalma vesuloy sidarim ervim mitein svorim uvayker mitzapim igaleirim Mimareini mai asher hemosharim michutz shiklo cherev hema mechadorim Ad mosai tabit roye kol sisorim kanei l'seirascha asher tzifrafrafu azarim kilo apirau akirau hikzarim Kesirim zevuchim igdilu amdurim halayla tisapak adoin kol yitzurim tinkoim dam anishpoch kamayim amugorim mishoid aniyim me'en kasurim am shavei fesh alunim umerurim richamo oisom bal tachrim okarno magbia ve'orima orid b'sichi ve'ahima v'koil nihi orima
So in discussing the public Chazon Ish, we've now described one part, and that was trying to build internally a world of Torah, trying to build individuals and trying to build the institutions that would be able to nurture those individuals. Give a small fraction of a glimpse into that part of the Chazon Ish's work. But there was a world beyond what he was building. There were the masses that were either not sympathetic or hostile to Torah. there was the government that was not sympathetic sometimes or hostile to Torah. And he had to deal with a world outside of himself as well. And what I would like to try to share with you here today is the approach of the Chazon Ish. And it will sound kind of funny. I think it has three components, and that he used judiciously. Component number one was no compromise. Component number two was compromise. In other words, there were times when he would not compromise, and there were times when he, to the frustration of others, very much believed in compromise. And the component number three was his incredible love and understanding of those who weren't quite ready, for everything that he would have presented as the ideal. Chazon Ish was a profound lover of Eretz Yisrael. As we said before, he yearned for it, like the Chafetz Chaim. He came to Eretz Yisrael. He was loving the possibilities, the mitzvahs hatluyas ba'aretz, but he was not in love with the secular state. He was disappointed by its creation as such, as a secular state. And he dreamt, of course, of the Jewish people's return to Eretz Yisrael. He was building up the presence of the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael, but the notion of a Jewish state that wasn't a Torah-based Jewish state was deeply, deeply and profoundly difficult for the Chazon Ish. It should be deeply and profoundly difficult for each and every one of us. The Jewish people are an ummah, as Rasadi Goyen said 1,000 years ago. We're a nation by our Torah. That's our constitution. That's our book of laws. That's our everything. How did he deal with the phenomenon of the secular state? So we saw before that he tried to build his Makom Torah, but he was building it within a world that was different. There was one time when the Satmar Rav, Zichrono Livracha, visited Eretz Yisrael, and he visited with the Chazon Ish. And the Satmar Rav famously asked him, he said, the Rambam writes that a person is supposed to, because we understand the influence of society, a person is supposed to place themselves in a society of tzaddikim and chachamim, and that way he will learn from their deeds. He should distance themselves from the Rishoim. And if he was in a Medina, the Rambam writes, that its ways are bad and its people don't go in the proper path. He should go to a place where they're tzaddikim, and that they act in a proper way. And if everywhere around him that he knows and that he hears is not good, like in our time, said the Rambam, or if you can't go to a place where it's good, so then what should he do? He should separate himself. He should live alone. Yeshev levadai, yechidi. He should stay alone. Better to be on your own than to be in a society that will pull you down. And if they were so bad that they didn't let him be there unless he joined them in their ways, so then he should go out to the caves, to the deserts, but he shouldn't follow in the paths of the sinners. That's what the Rambam writes. So the Satmar Rav asked the Chazon Ish, what do you do with this? You're in this secular Jewish state. So the Chazon Ish reportedly said to the Satmar Rav one thing, but the Chazon Ish also very often said another thing. What he said to the Satmar Rav was that we have caves to go to. We have our yeshivas. We have our spiritual places, and that's our place of refuge from the influences of the world around us. That's what he reportedly said to the Satmar Rav. Of course, that works for the first stage of the Rambam, which is just to separate yourself. But if they force you otherwise, what the Chazon Ish said regularly, and what informed to a great degree his public policy was that as long as they don't force us, we're good. All he wanted was that the state shouldn't compel them to give up on the things which were important to them. He did not, fundamentally, he did not ask for more. And in principle, he did not ask for more. And here we have to understand, again, the context of what's happening here and what we would say was the Chazon Ish's biggest fear. And this also is something which he reportedly said to the Satmar Rav and said other times. And again, it's all secondhand. It's not something that the Chazon Ish wrote. But this attitude is one which is found by many. He said, I'm not worried. My worry is not about the state compelling people to do the wrong thing. My worry is that the people are going to become enraptured with it and what it stands for. I'm not worried about compulsion. I'm worried about people getting excited about this. The idea that the Chazon Ish is expressing, I think, is just very, very simple to understand. What was happening in Jewish life, of which secular Zionism was only the latest of a series of such things that had sprouted up, was that there were other ideologies that were coming up as Jewish ideologies, but weren't truly Jewish ideologies. Whether it was the Enlightenment, whether it was socialism, whether it was Zionism. These were belief systems that were taking hold in the Jewish people, and they weren't belief systems that were grounded in Torah, that were about Torah, that were even necessarily hospitable to Torah. And this was his greatest worry. And I would like to suggest to you that it wasn't just his greatest worry. Share with you a Rambam. Shared it with some people before. The Rambam is very, very compelling. The Rambam, in the beginning of the second chapter of the Laws of Tefillah, explains how the Shemona Esrei went from being the 18 brachas to the 19 brachas. Right? Everybody knows Shemona Esrei is 18, but in the Shemona Esrei there are actually 19 brachas. 18 brachas were composed by the Anshe Knesses Hagdola, by the men of the Great Assembly. At the end, during the time after the first Beis HaMikdash, the beginning of the second Beis HaMikdash. But then later, that's the end of Perek Aleph of the Rambam. In the second chapter of Hilchos Tefillah, the Rambam writes as follows: in the days of Rabbi Gamliel, Rabu apikarsim b'Yisrael. Heretics became many in the Jewish people. Vayumitzirin liYisrael, and they were causing problems for the Jewish people. Umesisin aisam lashem yachrei Hashem, and they were convincing them to turn away from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What happened during the time of the second Beis HaMikdash? We had the Tzedukim, the Sadducees, the Baitusim. We had the Minim, the beginnings of Christianity. All of these things were happening in that time. These were Jewish movements that weren't faithful to the Torah. Listen to what the Rambam writes. When he saw that this was a greater need than any other human need, he and his Bezdin stood and established another bracha about this. To stop these movements. That was what this was for. The Rambam is very novel. It's a question one has to ask. What's the basis for the Rambam? The Gemara says that when there was the Minim, so they said, we have another need. So we need to have another need, we need another bracha. We need a 19th bracha. That's what the Gemara says. The Rambam says, there was a need that arose that was greater than all of the other needs. The Rambam writes in the first parak that the 18 brachas, the 12 middle brachas of the 18 brachas are containing sort of like all, the essence of all needs of people. The Rambam says, now there arose a need that was greater than all the other needs. Where did he get it from? It's not in the Gemara. Rav Chaim Kanievsky, who writes sources, writes no source for this Rambam in Chazal. In fact, I recently tried to send with someone a message asking him what if he has any theory on the Makar for this Rambam. But you know something? You don't need a Gemara for a source for this Rambam. All you have to do is live as a Jew, and you see that that's in fact the biggest threat, because we survive without Yerushalayim. But what decimates the Jewish people is when there are new Judaisms. They devastate. That's what it's talking about here. An alternative, a different definition of Yiddishkeit. I want to tell you a beautiful word, meant to say it before, from the Chazon Ish. This is what you would say, so to speak, spitz, classic. The Gemara says, Lecharva Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim was not destroyed until it left them Anshe Amona, faithful people, people of faith, of trust, of honesty. The Gemara says this in Shabbos. I think Kuf Yotes Amud Beis, if I'm not mistaken. The Gemara says this in Shabbos. So the Gemara asks a kasha. It says, but on the other hand, we have a psukim which indicate that even B'shas Kishloina, even when Yerushalayim was faltering and failing, they still had people of faith and people who were honest. Says the Gemara, it's not a problem. They didn't have people who were honest in their Bein Adam L'Chaverei. But b'mili d'shmaya, but in matters of heaven, the people were honest. And writes the Rashi over there that nobody presented Torah as something that it wasn't. Said the Chazon Ish, Rav Kreisworth, the great Rav Kreisworth, who was a strong Talmud of the Chazon Ish, said this over in the name of the Chazon Ish. He said, you see that the biggest horror is to distort what the Torah says. Why? Of course there are going to be people who are going to fail in honesty, and it's a bad thing. That's why Yerushalayim was destroyed. It's a terrible thing. But we understand that people are human, and they fail, and they make mistakes. But if you erode the standard, if you say there's no such thing as honesty, if you see there's no such thing as truth, if you take a principle of the Torah and you distort it, you'll say something krum and distorted about the Torah, then you've removed even the possibility. You've removed the conscience. The fact that people were dishonest and are dishonest is a horrible, horrible thing. It leads to problem after problem after problem after problem. But who stands up and says, hopefully not many, stand up and say that that's the right thing to do? They're weak, they fail, they submit. That's the story of people. So we have a job to strengthen them, to come back. But if you lose the principle, you've lost everything. And so the Chazon Ish looked at this, and he was deeply worried. And he and many Gedolei Chachmei Yisrael, this was certainly the position of Rav Chaim Ozer Grodzenski, and to an even greater extreme, it was the position of the Brisker Rav. And it was really, this was the point that differentiated. If we would speak about a point that differentiated, this was a point that differentiated the rabbinate that stayed on the right, so to speak, and the rabbinate that affiliated with the Zionist movement, the religious Zionist movement. Here is the machlokes. Here is the argument. The rabbinate that would affiliate with the secular Zionist movement would say, hey, look, they're allowing us in. We have a chance to take this edifice, which is going to be the Jewish state, which without us is going to be something that's completely secular. We have a chance to bring into it Yiddishkeit. What an opportunity. How could we pass this up? Imagine the Jewish state, Baruch Hashem, okay, you don't like the fact that they have this on Shabbos, or they have this or other thing, or this law, but hey, they have a rabbinate. They're not separating church and state. They're promoting Judaism as the faith of the people. Okay, so not perfect, but it's still something. Let's take it. We'll get a little, we'll grow it into more. There's a very, very good and compelling logic there. What's the counter-argument? The counter-argument is that if you're going to say, okay, here we are, we stand for the faith, and we're glad that you're letting us in, and allowing us to be partners. And we know that there are things that you stand for, and they're not quite aligned with the faith. So we have to find some kind of modus vivendi. We're going to have to live together. So you're going to give a little, and we're going to give a little. And you're going to produce something which is going to be a compromised version of what the Torah is supposed to look like. And remember what we started with the Chazon Ish. Remember how we started this morning. If you mourn over Yerushalayim, that means you never get resigned. You never settle. You never say, okay, so we can't have this, we'll have that. The Chazon Ish believed in zero compromise when it came to the principles of the Torah. And he was rightfully frightened and concerned that if we're going to be pursuing a partnership, if there's going to be a state rabbinate, that state rabbinate will necessarily have to compromise. It will necessarily have to reconcile itself with things that are not Torah, that are not Torah in its purity. And so he was fiercely independent. Almost the same position of the Chazon Ish, Bar Mitzvah Bacher, who stood in front of the Aron Kodesh and said, I want to learn Torah for its sake, Torah purely. I don't want to have a position. I don't want to be a rabbi. If I'll be a rabbi, so sometimes I'm going to have to please somebody and I'm going to compromise. Trust me. I want to be absolutely independent because the world needs pure Torah. Pure Torah. Not molded by pressures. Not molded by accommodations. That was what he stood for. Principle number one in public policy. And therefore he could form no compromises. He could form no alliances like that. He stood for this. Now you understand, this isn't imposing anything on anybody. This is saying we as a voluntary community, we want no part in it. Let me give you a classic example. A Chazon Ishnik, a person who truly follows the rulings of Chazon Ish, and you'll find again thousands and thousands of these people in Bnei Brak, do not use electricity on Shabbos. Now, I understand, you also don't use electricity on Shabbos. What does that mean? You don't turn on the lights or turn off the lights. You unscrew the bulb in your refrigerator. But your refrigerator runs on Shabbos, doesn't it? It's plugged into the wall. Your cholent remains, the crock pot remains plugged in on Shabbos. And you say, of course I do. We're not Sadducees. We're not Tzedukim. Tzedukim said, you can't have a fire burning in your house on Shabbos. We know that means you can't create a fire. But you can have a fire burning that's from before Shabbos. And you can. Don't worry. Relax. You can. Because you live here. Because you live here. And nobody's creating the fire on Shabbos for you. You know, the power plant is running wherever it's running. It's running for millions of people, of which a small portion of them are Jews. Who works in the power plant? Anyways, are there any Jews who work in the power plant? Probably there are some, I don't know, but it's not necessarily so. The problem was that the Chazon Ish lived in the Jewish state. And the electricity that was running to their outlets was being generated on Shabbos, and even when the power plants got a little more sophisticated and were a little bit more automatic, but this is the 30s and the 40s, they needed maintenance, they needed things to be done, and who worked in the power plants? The Jews worked in the power plants. Said the Chazon Ish, I'm going to have electricity running into my house on Shabbos that are being generated by a Jew? So other Rabbonim said to the Chazon Ish, Chumrah, so stringency, what are you talking about? We have to have the power plants running. Why? Number one, there are hospitals. Hospitals need electricity. You're going to have a blackout in the city, then there's no energy for the hospitals. So others said, no, so it's just the hospitals. So put the hospitals on their own little line from the grid, and everything else separate. But hey, there are people who are sick and needy in homes all over the place. We can't cut down electricity. Said the Chazon Ish, I understand. So get yourself generators. In Bnei Brak today, people have private generators. They go off the grid on Shabbos. He says, why? You can give me a halachic justification and say they have to do it anyway for the chaylim. Said the Chazon Ish, it's a chilul Hashem, it's a desecration of Hashem's name for Jews to be sitting in their house with the lights burning, knowing that there are Jews who are just running the power plant as if it's every day. They're not even doing anything different or special because, hey, look, we have to do it because there are chaylim, so we're going to do what we have to do in order to make it happen. No, it's business as usual that's keeping your cholent warm. How can you eat that cholent? The Chazon Ish went from speaking about lifnei iver lo sitein michshol and misayeh de'evre avera or whatever it is, something like that, to a new category. And again, today is not a discussion, but the Darkei Tshuva brings such a thing also from other poskim, that sometimes there's a consideration which goes beyond all the rest, which is you're making it and acting as if it's normal for a Jew to be Mechal Shabbos. And you're accepting it. You're just accepting it. And the Chazon Ish in his community said, we have to have a community of pure Torah, and part of a community of pure Torah is that it's not good for any Jew to be Mechal Shabbos. The Chazon Ish didn't go and bomb the power plant. He did nothing like that. Everybody shut off their electricity for Shabbos, and the stuff which they wanted going, they hooked up to their own. We're not putting any demand on you. We just can't take of it. Taking of it would be a compromise for us. The Chazon Ish had a famous thing where he said that chilul Shabbos, desecration of Shabbos, is permitted for pikuach nefesh when there's a need to save lives, but bitul Shabbos, erasing Shabbos, is never permitted. You can sometimes you have to desecrate Shabbos, this moment, that moment, but you can't get rid of Shabbos. And he felt this was bitul of Shabbos. The Chazon Ish, who was very tolerant of those outside, deeply tolerant, as we'll see, that's his third principle. But in his community, he wanted to make sure that people stayed strong. One of the great examples, again, goes almost side by side with the electricity example, is the Chazon Ish's position when it came to what was an economic crisis in those days in the Yishuv, which was the milking crisis. How do you milk your cows on Shabbos? Now, for us, this sounds like somewhat quaint. We don't milk our cows on Shabbos. We go to the store, to the dairy case on Friday and on Motzei Shabbos. But this was an issue which was in people's backyards. How do they milk the cows on Shabbos? And the cows need to be milked every day. This was a major halachic issue. So what are the halachic solutions? So one halachic solution was that they should be chaylev le'ibud. They should milk it onto the ground. They'll relieve the cows of their difficulty by milking them, but they'll lose the money, they'll lose the milk for the day. Many people couldn't withstand. It was hard for them to do that. A solution would have been that they would have workers who don't have to keep Shabbos, non-Jewish workers. What was the problem? The problem was that at that time, in the pre-state days especially, when there was a lot of terror that was going on between the Arabs of Israel and the Jews of Israel, so there was a very staunch Zionist position that was growing, which was very different. Again, you have to understand that many people, like the Chazon Ish, so to speak, would be considered on the political left. In the Zionist movement, they started a movement, and the movement was called a movement against Avodah Zarah. Except Avodah Zarah didn't mean idols. Avodah Zarah meant foreign workers. They called it Avodah Zarah. For someone to have an Arab do the work when they're trying to undermine us and they're standing in the way of us and they're terrorizing us and so on and so forth, forget about it. Now, there's two pieces to that. One piece to that is a safety concern. How can you have somebody around who will do it? And then there's another one, which is a matter of principle. And it was heavily a matter of principle as well. But that would have been the best solution. But instead, and whatever, there's a issue of chaylev l'seich machal, of milking into food, where arguably it may be okay under certain circumstances, but again, you couldn't salvage it. We're not going to get into the halachic discussion. People were not up to the challenge, by and large. And they were failing, and they were milking their cows on Shabbos. They didn't want to take non-Jewish workers, and they didn't want to waste the milk. So they were milking their cows. The Chazon Ish, in 1936, the Chazon Ish wrote a letter, L'man Shabbos, coming out, again, didn't usually do these things, for the sake of Shabbos. And he says, if my spirit is so torn within me, I said I have to say something to calm my spirit. Our city that flies the flag for glory and for good within the new Yishuv, as the New Yerushalayim, our city which holds up the flag of Torah as a fortress of Judaism and so on and so forth, and protects the observance of Shabbos. But suddenly, we become weak. And suddenly, we're milking cows on Shabbos, and nobody stops. Who are the desecrators of Shabbos? Not outsiders, but our own, the people we ourselves sending to our chadorim, sending to our yeshivos. We're doing that. We're milking our cows, he says, and then we go home and we sing Zmiris at the table. We sing about Kol Shomer Shabbos, Kados Mechalaloi. He says, how is this? Chazon Ish writes, and then again, of course, he says, Gam Eila hachovim b'Shabbos loy b'mered v'loy b'mal yasu. Those who are milking on Shabbos, I understand they don't mean to be rebellious. Rak hem esurim b'yad yitzrim v'koshem lamed b'nisayin v'lach lev ala karka. He says, what can they do? It's too hard. It's too hard to give up, to spill all that milk on the ground. It's too much to ask of them. It's too much of a pressure. So the Chazon Ish says, so by me writing this letter, I'm hoping to be able to somehow help them to get past that. And to instead feel, you know something, we'll lose money, but we'll lose our standing if we don't. That was what he was trying to do. A rare instance of doing this kind of a thing, but again, he was talking entre nous, amongst ourselves, in the family. If we would let the standard fall, if we would let it slip, it would be gone. He felt that it would be gone. Another example, another classic and great example, is the example of the meeting of Ben Gurion and the Chazon Ish. Ben Gurion, David Ben Gurion, the Prime Minister of Israel, came to see the Chazon Ish. He wanted to go meet with the Brisker Rav. The Brisker Rav wouldn't meet with him. He wasn't interested. Chazon Ish, when the Chief of Staff came who had gone to the Brisker Rav, and Brisker Rav said he didn't feel well and he didn't want to and it wasn't worth it for him to come, he'll just be disappointed. When he came to the Chazon Ish and he said the Prime Minister would like to come to see you, Chazon Ish responded and said, my door is always open. My door is always open. This was in the midst of a terrible, terrible battle. It was at the end of the Chazon Ish's life. It was the battle over the drafting of women to the army and public service, what's called the Giyus Banos. And there was terrible, terrible tension. The community felt that at that point in time what was happening was exactly what the Chazon Ish was afraid of that we mentioned earlier, which was that they were imposing something. They weren't creating something, but they were imposing something. They said that every Jewish girl, when she reaches the age of 18, has to do public service of some kind, even if it's not in the army. And the Chazon Ish felt that pulling the girl out of their house, it didn't matter to which environment, to force her out of her house to go to work someplace else was unacceptable. And all, many Gedolei Chachmei Yisrael felt exactly the same way. Ben Gurion sought these visits at this point in time. And he came to see the Chazon Ish. And he sat with the Chazon Ish. And they didn't talk supposedly one word about Giyus Banos, about this issue, the draft of the women in the whole conversation. I have here the transcript, which is not a literal transcript of the conversation that was written after the fact by Yitzchak Navon, who was later a president of Israel, who accompanied Ben Gurion on the visit. Others weren't there. There are many apocryphal accounts of what was said, what wasn't said. He wrote a transcript shortly after the meeting from memory, and Ben Gurion began the question and began the discussion. He says, I want to ask you one question, and that is, how can religious Jews and secular Jews coexist in this land? That's the question which I wanted to discuss with you. Jews come here from all kinds of lands, hundreds and thousands, with all kinds of different traditions, with all kinds of different cultures, with all kinds of different outlooks. They're religious Jews and non-religious Jews, observant Jews, non-observant Jews, and the state stands both at a danger from the outside from the Arabs, who still want to destroy us, and it's very important for us to find whatever common strength within us to band together. But we have a danger of exploding from internally, from the tensions which we have between us. So what should we do about this? So Chazon Ish famously gave an answer from the Gemara, where it says that if there are two camels and they're coming to a one-way street, they're passing each other in a one-way street, or two wagons, two camels, two boats, right? The Gemara says one example, people say it over in different ways, is that, so which one has to yield to the other? So the Gemara says the one which has a burden, which is carrying freight, goes ahead, and the other one has to move aside. So the Chazon Ish said, we are carrying here a cargo that's been with the Jewish people for 3,000 years. You have to make room for us. The Chazon Ish, the Ben Gurion said back to the Chazon Ish, well, we also have a cargo. We're drying the swamps. We're building the land. We're defending the country. And the Chazon Ish said, without the people of faith studying Torah and observing Torah, you won't be able to defend the country. And Ben Gurion said, without people defending the country, you won't be able to have your faith. They'll be killed, Rahman al-Islam. And they went back and forth, and back and forth, and Ben Gurion left. And Yitzchak Navon says Ben Gurion left, completely taken with the Chazon Ish, and completely frustrated with the Chazon Ish. I'll read to you, so that we'll be accurate. Achrei sheyatzu, after they left, Ben Gurion said, Zehu Yehudi Yafeh. This is a beautiful Jew, wise, beautiful eyes, wise eyes, tzanua, modest. Where does he get his strength from? His influence? But how are we going to live together in this land? There are many things that can break apart the society. This is the most important question. They left at an impasse. The Chazon Ish didn't satisfy him. He was taken with the Chazon Ish. But he was not appreciative that the Chazon Ish didn't engage with him in this discussion. But you understand why the Chazon Ish didn't engage with him in this discussion. This was the Chazon Ish's shita. If they would come to an accommodation, what would that mean? That means you give on this and we'll give on that. And he had one task, and his task was to preserve something that was not compromised in terms of its essential quality, one drop. And so he would warmly and politely say, thank you for coming. When Ben Gurion got up to leave, he didn't leave upset. When Ben Gurion got up to leave, he went over to the bookshelf and he asked about this sefer and about that sefer. And the Chazon Ish talked to him about this forum. He wasn't, Ben Gurion wasn't a complete Am Oretz. He quoted psukim and ideas to the Chazon Ish, both in here and in the letter which he wrote to him afterwards. Of course he wasn't. Still first generation. But Chazon Ish wouldn't engage, because engagement meant compromise. and he couldn't compromise. That was principle number 1. Principle number 2 was that you need to compromise. How does that work? Chazon Ish had a Masorah, had a tradition from the Chafetz Chaim. Listen to this tradition, and don't try this at home. The Chafetz Chaim said, we make a bracha asher kitshanu b'mitzvaysa v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Every morning, Hashem, who commanded us, la'asok b'divrei Torah. What does it mean, la'asok b'divrei Torah? To engage in words of Torah. But what's the word la'asok? La'asok is a word we use for business, to do business with the words of Torah. Said the Chafetz Chaim, with the words of Torah, sometimes you have to do business. When you do business, what do? You give and you get. You give and you get. Sometimes when it comes to promoting Torah, you give and you get. You have to be able to compromise. And the Chazon Ish accepted this Messiah from the Chafetz Chaim. And he said, sometimes you have to give a little. Example, the Chazon Ish argued strongly with Rabbi Chanan Wasserman, Hashem Yikayim Damai. They had a correspondence, significant letters which were exchanged. Rabbi Chanan was a very big proponent, as were the Brisker Rav and others, of the people in Eretz Yisrael telling them that they had to opt out of the Vad Leumi, of the National Council, which was basically the Jewish state before there was a Jewish state. There was a non-government organization that governed, so to speak, the Jewish community in Eretz Yisrael. It was in the hands not from people, and there was an option that was given for people to opt out of it. Just like in the European communities in Western Europe, they could opt out of the organized Jewish community. There was such an option to opt out of the Jewish community. And Agudas Yisrael told people they should opt out of the Jewish community in order not to be dragged in and be part of this, which was promoting all kinds of secular things in Eretz Yisrael, of the organized Jewish community. Chazon Ish had many people, as we said before, who we went to have rabbis all throughout Eretz Yisrael. And those rabbis could only get their positions if they hadn't opted out. Chazon Ish didn't tell them to opt out. He said, go ahead, be the rabbinate in those communities, be the rabbinate, be paid by the Jewish, by the Vad Leumi, by the National Council. It's not a problem. Rabbi Chanan was very upset. What do you mean? You're validating, you have to be fighting with them, it's going to be compromised. Said the Chazon Ish, the rabbi in the little town has no contact with the bureaucracy negotiating policy. The rabbi in the town just gets to do God's work. He gets to build the mikveh. He gets to make sure that there's kosher shechita. He gets to build a day school, a cheder, that people should learn Torah. If we don't send them, they won't go. He says, so you're going to tell me something. We're going to go and we're going to yell and scream. Again, I'd love to read you these letters for their authenticity. We're going to run out of time, even for this very, very curtailed and edited version which we're doing. He says, you're going to tell me that you're doing more for the purity of Torah. Why? What are you doing? Those rabbis who are taking the position based on the Vad Leumi, you're going to yell at them and scream at them and say what you're doing, what you're doing, what you're doing. You're not going to be able to do anything. They're not leaving. They're not leaving, and what they're doing in the end, they're doing so much to build up for the Torah. They're the ones who are accomplishing for the Torah. There's no compromise on principle here. And this, I think, is the principle of the Chazon Ish. There's such a thing as compromise, which is compromise on principle, where you misrepresent the truth of things, and there's such a things which are, okay, I could see why somebody would say, no, there were whole groups of people who said, Jews should not vote, from Jews should not be voting in the elections for Knesset, from Jews shouldn't be running in the elections for the Knesset. It's a secular institution. Chazon Ish said, run for the elections for the Knesset. Why? Because, yeah, sure, we're engaging with them. We're engaging with them. This is the way we're going to accomplish. This is the way we're going to build. You're not going to do it in a way where you're compromising the principles of the Torah, because the rabbis remain separate. But let there be the voices heard in the elections that there are so many and so many Jews who want Torah to be there in Eretz Yisrael. And let people be there to accomplish. Now you and I, we can fiddle with this and say, but one second, maybe the political person will make a compromise and he'll force the rabbis to make the compromise in the name of the thing, and that'll bring down the community. And that stuff certainly could happen. And that stuff may even happen sometimes. But you know, I can't use the expression, that's why they paid the Chazon Ish the big bucks. Right? That wouldn't work here exactly. But the Chazon Ish understood that there are some things which are a direct line to compromise in principle, and he wouldn't take it. And there were other things which were not compromise in principle. They were tactical moves in order to be able to make things work. And those he did. Some places wouldn't take a penny for chinuch from the government. The Chazon Ish knew from building cheder after cheder after cheder that b'derech hateva, naturally, the impoverished yishuv would not be able to do anything without being able to get the education funds that are available for anybody. But what did he do? He stood for absolute independence in that stream. And in fact, when the Jewish state first started, they had 4 school systems, 2 secular systems, 1 religious Zionist system, and the 4th one, which was known as the Zerem Revi, which was the Haredi system. And they had independence, but they were a 4th government system. And he was very much involved in pushing it to be what's called Chinuch Atzmai, which is its own independent system that gets some money from the government rather than a 4th system within the government. I'm not enough of a lamdan to tell you the difference between the two, exactly how it worked, but this is where it lies, which is independence, never compromising in principle. I want to give you another example. This is a good illustration of where this difference lay. The chief rabbi of Eretz Yisrael in the time of the Chazon Ish, after the passing of Rav Kook, who passed away just 2 years after the Chazon Ish arrived in Eretz Yisrael, was Rav Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Herzog, Rav Herzog. Rav Herzog was a goy in Olam, a brilliant Talmid Chacham, also a very educated person, a man with multiple PhDs, and he had been the chief rabbi of Ireland. But he was a gadol. We have shelves full already of svarim from the writings of Rav Herzog. He was the chief rabbi of Israel. The Chazon Ish preferred his candidacy to the other candidate, who was also a very, very great person, but was less of a preference for the Chazon Ish. But they had a major dispute, the Chazon Ish and Rav Herzog. Major dispute. And what was that? Rav Herzog had a vision, which was exactly what we're talking about here. Rav Herzog said, here I am, I'm the chief rabbi of Israel. As Israel becomes a state, we have a chance to create the laws of the country, and those laws can be influenced by the Torah. And Rav Herzog wrote extensively and envisioned extensively all kinds of ways of creating within the law system of Eretz Yisrael Torah elements. But there's going to be compromise. And one test case of compromise was the sugya of Yerushas Habas, a daughter's inheritance rights. Now, all of us know, we read in the Parsha just a couple of weeks ago, the story of Bnei Tzlaf, a couple of Shabbos ago, the story of the Bnei Tzlafchad, the daughters of Tzlafchad, where the Torah says that if there are no sons, then the daughter inherits. If there are no sons, then the daughter inherits. Chazal, already we have in the Mishnah and the Gemara, Chazal created all kinds of institutions to make sure that the daughter didn't end up empty-handed. But they didn't say, the Torah says the son inherits before the daughter, we say the son and the daughter is the same. No. They made sure that the kind of taking care of the daughter that the father would want became sort of like institutionalized, and that the daughter wasn't left out in the cold from the Yerusha. Israel, in its founding, was cutting-edge egalitarian. In the Vad Leumi, in the National Council, women had the vote before they had the vote in Finland, in many places in Western Europe. The kibbutzim, as everybody knows, were cutting-edge egalitarian. The Israeli armed forces were, and to some degree are, cutting-edge egalitarian. The chance of having a law that would have boys before girls in Yerusha was very, very slim. Rav Herzog came up with a proposal which would work according to halacha, using the Hefker Bezdin Hefker approach, the fact that Bezdin has the ability to appropriate monies, and he constructed a law, and being very, very overly simplistic, in order to be able to make it work. That it could work halachically. The Chazon Ish vehemently objected. The language of his letter, it was a letter which was not written to Rav Herzog, it was written to Rav Isser Zalman Meltzer, who was very close to the chief rabbinate, and he wanted to encourage Rav Isser Zalman Meltzer to be with them on the same side in this issue. He said, what we have here is a principle that's being compromised. You're trying to create egalitarianism in Yerusha, in inheritance, which is not the value that the Torah says. I know you can make it work, but you're presenting it as a principle. You're presenting it as a principle to a society which has it as a principle. If they'll do what they'll do, let them do what they do. If they want to do it, do it. But don't present it as, here we have a Torah law which is different than the original law of the land. Rav Herzog wrote, he says, we need to be osek b'divrei Torah. We have to do business with the words of Torah. There are so many elements of the law, of the civil law, that's going to be created in the land that we will be able to influence and shape by the Torah. But this one is a red line. If we don't come up with some way around it, then they're going to throw out the whole package. The Chazon Ish said, so throw out the whole package. That's exactly the point. If you're going to make a package and you're going to call it the Torah, and part of it isn't the Torah, it's just you found a way to make it work that it's not illegal, you're presenting a distorted Torah. And what's going to have the ultimate staying power is keeping the Torah pristine, pure, what it is, what it's supposed to be. Not Torah chigri sakvis bal shilafar. Compromise? No compromise. Chazon Ish would not be a partner with the state, because partner with the state meant we're going to find some way to make this wonderful hybrid of the secular and the religious, which means that the secular isn't going to be quite secular and the religious isn't going to be quite religious. That was the way the Chazon Ish viewed it. Like any good negotiator, the art of the deal. That's what happens. Everybody's got to give a little bit. And in Torah, we're not in the business of giving a little bit. If it's something tactical, if it's association, that's what the Chazon Ish wrote, and he wrote very strongly to Rabbi Chanan. He said the idea of al tischaber l'rosha, the idea of don't attach yourself to the wicked, he says it's not a blanket rule, that you can't sit in the same chamber as them, that you can't be paid money from them. You have to look at that and say, what am I doing? He said Yaakov Avinu wrestled with the angel of Esav. He was mechaber, he was attached to a rasha. He was attached to him to wrestle him. If we're ever going to win, we have to engage. That was the Chazon Ish. There was a great man in Eretz Yisrael, Rav Yitzchak David Grossman. Everybody knows him from Migdal HaEmek. Right? A great family, an amazing family. His father, Rabbi Yisrael Grossman, was sent by the Brisker Rav to the Chazon Ish on the eve of the Chazon Ish's meeting with Ben Gurion. The Chazon Ish and Rav Bengis sent a letter to the Brisker Rav, sent a letter to the Chazon Ish. The Chazon Ish and the Brisker Rav sent a letter to the Chazon Ish. And he had to deliver the letter. He didn't want to deliver the letter. The Chazon Ish opened the letter and he turned red and he turned white and he turned red and he turned white. What was the Brisker Rav saying? He knew he wouldn't meet with Ben Gurion. But the Chazon Ish believed that sometimes you would compromise. You would compromise. So he was going to meet with him and the Chazon Ish, and he figured he says that the Prime Minister of Israel certainly had his advance people work something out before he actually agrees to go to the meeting. He's not going to go to a meeting and then be turned back on his face with nothing to show for it. They probably have a deal already. So they wrote a letter to the Chazon Ish. Chazon Ish, don't give in. Don't give in. Chazon Ish was very hurt. Very hurt. He says, I've been standing on this issue. What's the difference? Of course I compromise. I'll sit with Ben-Gurion. I'll talk to Ben-Gurion. I'll look at his face. Right? Contrary to what some put in there, which is that they claim that the Chazon Ish took off his glasses when he met with Ben-Gurion so he wouldn't look in the face of a wicked person. No one says his glasses were on. He would look. No problem. He would look. But on principle, to change what the Torah is supposed to be, never. Never. That's the word that we told you before from Rav Kreisworth. Anshe Amon and Yerushalayim, people fail. He understood that people fail. But principle maintains. And let's now just, the last piece, which is this piece of compromise. The last piece in this discussion of the three principles, one is compromise and one is non-compromise. What the Chazon Ish did understand, though, very, very strongly, was that people couldn't always stick to perfect principle. And part of what the Chazon Ish had a very, very famous piece where he spoke about the Talmudic principle that spoke about when sometimes people who are minim, who are these heretics, undermining things within the Jewish people, that there was a principle sometimes to literally get rid of them in everything that means. And the Chazon Ish said, you have to understand that the principle there of getting rid of them would be if there was one here and one there, and people understood, the community was faithful, and people understood, and the result would be a strengthening of the faith. But wrote the Chazon Ish, I should read it to you. Even with the shortage of time, I should read it to you. Excuse me 1 second. Venira, Hilchos Shchita, Siman Gimel. The idea that you would get rid of someone like that is only in a time when Hashem's divine providence is bright and clear. Like when there were miracles, when the heavenly voices would come out and tell people things. Everybody could see the divine providence guiding the righteous of the time. He says when people were deviating, they were clearly deviating. They were moving from what was clear and obvious as the baseline, what could be understood as the baseline. Then he said, Biur Rishoim, getting rid of the wicked, would indeed maintain things. Everyone understood that they were the ones, they were the bad guys, they were taking people away from faith, and that they should not be part of it. Avol bizmano helem, writes the Chazon Ish, but at a time when Hashem's hand is hidden, shenichriso amuna min dalas ha'am, he says, from the masses, faith is absent. Ein b'maseh harada geder hapirtza elo hosavas hapirtza. If we will act aggressively, it doesn't help. It just hurts. It brings down the faith in the eyes of people. The Chazon Ish had choice words for the Kanoim, the zealots of Yerushalayim. He says, on one hand, of course, my heart is with you, because you stand and you ache for the purity of the Torah. And when you see people doing things that are against the Torah, so you act and you react strongly, and I appreciate that in your hearts. But he said, I have two problems with your methods. They did things, that was the first time they torched cars and stuff like that. He said, I have two problems. One problem is that you're not pure Torah. Because the methods which you're using are methods which are taken from the world's protests. There's no precedent for that in Torah, of doing that kind of thing to protest. These actions of forced hands are, people say, well, if they can do it for the handicapped, or if they can do it for the Ethiopians, why can't they do it for the Torah, for this? Because it's not a method of the Torah. That's why. It's not a method of the Torah. Maybe the society shouldn't be upset and say, let them protest like everybody else, but I'm upset. Because it's not a method of the Torah. And secondly, said the Chazon Ish, what's the purpose of protest? To strengthen the Torah. When you do something that those people who you're trying to convince can't possibly understand, you're distancing them from the Torah. And the Chazon Ish used the phrase, you have to bring them close, ba'avosos ava, with ropes, with cords of love. And that's what he did. That's what he taught to do. He didn't, the Ben Gurion walked out from that meeting, he was engaged, he loved the Chazon Ish. He was frustrated in policy. A little bit later, the Chazon Ish wrote him a letter about Giyus Bonos. He wrote it after he lost the battle with the religious parties in the Knesset. They weren't going to bolt the coalition. He says, I'm writing to you now today, Prime Minister, I didn't write to you before. I didn't bring it up before. I knew before it was in the middle of a political coalition struggle. If I would ask you to give in, it would look like you were submitting in the coalition struggle. It's not fair for me to ask you to make that kind of a political concession. But now you won that. You're in position. Now I turn to you as a person who respects freedom of people and their freedom of conscience, religious freedom. Now, Ben Gurion, you won the battle. If now you will stand up gallantly and you will say, but for those to whom this is religiously objectionable, I'm not going to force, I'm not going to impose this. You will be the prince. You will be respecting, you will be, and here the Chazon Ish didn't write these words, but you will be allowing us not to have to run away to the cave, because we won't be living in a place where it's imposed. Chazon Ish wrote, please remove this gzeira, this decree. And Ben Gurion wrote back. And he wrote back firm. And he said, no. I am standing on principle. Because you have your principles, but we have our principles of sharing the burden. And I have to stand for principle. And I can't give in. And he says, and I object to you using the term gezeira, decree. Decrees were from the Bolsheviks. Decrees were a law which is passed by a Jewish government for Jews should not be called a gzeira, should not be called a decree. But he didn't understand that was exactly the whole thinking of the Chazon Ish. That he could stay there unless it was imposed, unless they were forcing their way on us. And Ben Gurion ends the letter and he says, it's worth reading to you. He says, I must say, I'm sorry, I can't find it this second. I'll tell you what he says basically, remember it very well. He says, if you permit me to say so, I must say that my experience of meeting with you left me with a profound impression, and I will never forget it for the rest of my life. How a person threads the needle. No compromise. Compromise when it's not a compromise on values. He'll talk to him, he'll befriend him. Briskerov couldn't look at him. He'll talk to him, he'll befriend him. He'll understand failure. He'll understand what we need to do to win people back. It's such an art form. That was the Chazon Ish. That was the Chazon Ish. That was greatness. That's the art form which we need today like we needed it then. No different. No different. We're now going to say 2 more Kinnos. I'm just giving you the roadmap here. we're going to say 2 more Kinnos. The 2 Kinnos that we're going to say come from towards the end of the Kinnos book. It's Lamed Vav and Lamed Zayin, Kinnos 36 and 37. In the art scroll, it's page 328. In the paperback, it's page Nun. And I want to take a minute to tell you what we're going to do afterwards, and then a minute of introduction about the Kinnos. What we're going to do after those 2 Kinnos is we're going to just talk a little bit, one last piece in advance of the Kinnos for the Holocaust, which we say. And we're going to be talking about the question, which of course came to the Chazon Ish, about establishing a Holocaust Memorial Day, a Yom HaShoah, establishing Kinnos for the Holocaust. And Chazon Ish, there's much discussion about what the Chazon Ish did and didn't do in this regard. And we're going to be talking about that. And it's a good way to end and to encapsulate what we've seen here. What we're going to say now are 2 Kinnos. Kinnos of Rav Yehuda Halevi, famous Tzion Halosi Shali Lishlom Asirayich. There's a series of several Kinnos at the end of the book that all start with the word Tzion. Tzion, Zion. Zion, a holy word. Rav Kalman Kahana said, walking with the Chazon Ish, he said, I don't understand what happened. He said, you know how it was for Jews in Europe? A mashulach, a person came for the most important yeshiva. He came for a couple of weeks. He worked day and night. He went away with a few rubles. He said there was a pushka people had it in their house for a Meir Balanes, which was the tzedakah for Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, for the communities, the Kolim in Eretz Yisrael. Every community would send thousands, hundreds. They did. This is Eretz Yisrael, love of Eretz Yisrael. How a Jew who reads the Chumash, who reads about Moshe Rabbeinu's yearning for Eretz Yisrael, who reads everything, Jews loved Eretz Yisrael to pieces. Jewish people lost their faithfulness to Torah. Came along with Tzviyash Kalisher, a tzaddik, a goyen. He said they're losing so much. Let's just save one thing. Let them hope for a land of their own for Eretz Yisrael. So he kept one mitzvah for them, he said. And that mitzvah, and they give their tzedakah for that mitzvah, Baruch Hashem. But we have what to be ashamed of. Tzion was appropriated, was taken away from us. Tzion aloisi shali l'shloim asirayich. But we understand, hopefully now, a little bit better why. Why the Chazon Ish had his hesitation, his arm's length from the Zionists, the secular Zionists. Because there's only one Judaism. Rav Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik, Rav Kook, all of them, they said exactly the same thing. In principle, in practice, they did things differently. But the Rav Soloveitchik said every year, almost, in his famous recorded speeches to the Mizrahi, when he was the head of the Mizrahi, he says, I don't know what Zionism is. I only know one thing, Torah. One thing, Torah. And what we're doing to advance the Torah. So, different opinions as to what advances the Torah. There's room for different opinions as to what advances the Torah. But there's no room for different opinions as to what we stand for. For us, Tzion HaMetzuyenes. Tzion HaMetzuyenes is the Migdash, the Yerushalayim, Eretz Yisrael, the Torah. Read the words of these 2 Kinnos, Tzion, Tzion. Read these words and let us recall and remember. Tzion aloisi shali lishloim asirayich, darshei shloimech, ve'im yaser adorayich, miyom u'mizrach u'mitzafoin v'seimon, shloim rachayk v'karoiv, si mikol avorayich, u'shloim asir tikfonoi sein ma betal chermoin, v'nichsav l'ridetom al harorayich, livkois enusei chanisani, ve'isech loim shiva shvusei chanichinor l'shirayich, Libi leveisel v'fnei el mioid yemen L'machanayim v'chol nigei Toirayich shamash chinosh chunalach V'yetzrech b'sach l'mul sharei shachach Shiorayich U'chvoid adoinoi levad Oyom yoirech V'ein tzar v'shemesh U'choy chavim yoirech Chevchar l'nafshi l'ishtapech V'imkei masher ruach alim shvuchal b'chirayich
עד בייס מלוכה ועד כיסא כבודל ואיך יושבו עבודים עלי כיסאיס גבירייך מי יתנני משויטט במקום איזה אשר נגלו אלוהים לחזייך וצירייך מי יעשה לי כנפיים וירחיק נדייד אני אדלך בישראל לבבי בין בשורייך אפול יפי עלי ארצך וירצה עוונייך למועד ואחרי ננס אפורייך אף כי במלי עלי קברוי זבוי סי ושלמים עלי חברוי נבחר כבורייך הרו עבורים ואורור אשר שום שני עירים גדולים ואורייך ומהורייך חיי נשמי סביר ארצך וממור דרור אף כסופריך ולפסוף נאורייך ינם לנפשי עליך רבי יחב ולא ישממו אשר יודבירייך במקום ערינך אשר נגנזו במקום קרובייך אשר שכנו חדרי חדורייך על גויז וישליך באר נסר ויקריב סמון חילל בארץ בבלס נזירייך חרב לי אוכל ושסויס בזך זה כסרבו הכלובים אסכפירייך ויך מאוריוי ממסוי כליני וידרה בפי עורבים פגרי בשורייך כיסי גיינים לאט הרפימת ככפור מלאו כסולי ונפשי ממרורייך איסס גרולו אשתך מורך ואזכור איבה וימצא שמורייך ציון כלילס יופי אהבה וכן אורי לימוד ובך נקשרו נפשו יזכה וירייך הם הסמכים לשלבוסך והכואבים על שם ומויסך וקים על שברייך ליבור שבי שיפים נגדך משתחווים משמים כמוי עלינו כך שאורייך את ראה מוינך אשר גולו ונספסרו מיער לגיבה ולא ישכחו גדרייך המחזיקים בשולייך ומסרמצים לאלויס ולחויס וסנסני תמורייך שינורו פסרו יערכוך גדולם ומבלום ידמו לסומייך ואורייך אל מי ידמו משיחייך ואל מי נביאייך ואל מי לביאייך ושירייך שנביאך לא יבכל ללקום המלכויס ואלילים חוסנך לא ילום לדור ודור נזירייך יבוא למוישה ואלוהייך ואשרי אנוש יבחר ויקרא וישכוין בחצרייך אשרי מחכה ויגיע ויראה לא יסיירך ויבקו עליו שחורייך לרויס מטייבס בחירייך ולויס בשמחוסך בשובך ואלי קדמוס נעורייך ציון ככי כל צרי גלעד לצירייך ונדי למען כיום גדלו שברייך ארץ צביעת בסך כיום נסונה ומן עדן מקיים כל יקור יצאו לאורייך ואילויס נעמון רחץ בשרוי במי ירדן אז אין נסע ואף כי תורייך אף לא יסו לאף ארצך בזוב ופוז יקור כמי מחצב הורייך כל תענוגים בבי בוסרך לכועס והשן ולום כצוף מסקו מרורייך פרייך למרפא וכל הולטו לא עלוי כי ארצת דבש היו יורייך עם הפסונים בריס קורסו מסייך ואין סוטון אבל השלמו להם כפירייך בוך כל בהימו ואויב חכמו עדי כחמור היו לפונים לבין יויר חמורייך בוך אלו ועדוי ואין בלתוי ויצא שמי אחד כי אליהם אמס נדע בשירייך מה טוב ונועים בבוי שבטי בני יעקב שלוש פעמים בכל שנה בישורייך בחסויד עתודה וסויד החכמייס ובאובני קדם חכמי שבא לכתוי ספרים שייטים בכל הגבול שייטים בכל עיר ועיר זקני אמס הם ואין מיירה כמיירייך מלך בקרבך ובחסורך חיילים בכל נשק ועל כל דיים גברו גבירייך בימי בחורי סייס קדש ליל נבחרו ובני נביאים בני אל חי נאורייך פחת תקופו עלי קבו אמס נשקולות תיכן שני סדור ודור בשני הדורייך מלעד לבנו כביורכך והמחזה שומע לרחבך ובערי ססורייך נראה בסמוס כסיל בוך יעלה קישור כל חדשים לבד זה בחדורייך היד וירך וקיים הרוין ויהדר היכול מזבח הצירה ושיחך וינמך יכפר ומאיו לי ילדי כעוס ויין נזירייך איפה נביאים בני אליון וכל יצאיך עבדו והלכו שבים מלכך ושרייך ויס יפי נויף בראש אפרויס תבל בראשם בראשך לנץ חתך סחפך הלוי קוצר כצירייך ארץ מיוסך ובין אחרים שתופוך ורוח חביצך ויש ברע באורייך מוריס בצורך אשר מצור נצורך ועזורים אחרוך ואתו יסבר אחרייך אלא מרוח עדי נקרא סריאל וחבר בנבוך הרי תראה ועדורייך שובי ליל בו עליך אל תתני לוי דומי עד שוב כבודי עד יבנה כדרייך נפשי מאוד נחשפה לירויס בזיו זורך שלום יהיד לך ורייב שלום ליהו ישרייך
before we do this one on the Holocaust, I want us to sing something together. I want us to sing what could have been the national anthem of the State of Israel. You know that when they were deciding what would be the national anthem of the State of Israel, there was a runner-up. And imagine, I think we should sing it together, and imagine what would be different if this was what it had been. The runner-up was Yossela Rosenblatt's Shir Hamalos. B'shuv Hashem es shivas Tzion hayinu kechelmim. When Hashem would return the prisoners of Zion, we were like dreamers. Az Yomru V'Agoyim, the nations would say, Higdil Hashem la'asaysi meileh. Beautiful tune, everybody knows it. But imagine if that's what was sung from the beginning. Imagine if that was what was sung. Tzion, Tzion. Shir Hamalos b'shuv Adoino yeshivas Tzion hayinu kechelmim az yimaleis chayk b'nu shoyneinu Az Yomru V'Agoyim Higdil Adonai la'asaysi meileh Higdil Adonai la'asaysi manu oyinu semeichim Shuva Adonai yeshiviseinu kafikim v'hanegev hazoirim v'dima berina yiktayru Naisei Meshech Hazor Abayavai Verina Naisei Halom Oisof. When the Holocaust occurred, of course, there was much discussion about its commemoration. The Jewish people have fast days. We have fast days over the Churban, over the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. We say Kinnos. We say these different poems and lamentations. Within the Kinnos are included not just things that happened from the time of the Beis HaMikdash, but even things which happened from the times of the Rishonim, the times of the Crusades. People wrote Kinnos about much later events in Jewish history. People established fast days about much later events in Jewish history. What should be done to remember the Holocaust? We're not going to take the time to go through the whole story. It's a very interesting, important, fascinating story. But it's a big story. You know that there's a Holocaust Day, Yom HaShoah, which is commemorated on the 27th of Nisan. Very complex. It was called Yom HaShoah v'Hagvura, the day of the Holocaust and of strength. The date which was chosen was the date of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. It's not even quite the date of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, which was before Pesach. We won't get into the complications as how they chose that date. People were not happy with it, continue to not be happy. Many people continue not to be happy with it. First of all, Nisan is a month of joy. We don't even say eulogies at funerals in the last time of Nisan. To choose a date in Nisan to make a day of mourning would seem an odd choice and not within religious sensibilities. To choose to commemorate the Holocaust based on the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising was something which was also very counter to the sensibilities of many. And it spoke to a sort of embarrassment. I'm not telling anybody anything that they don't know. A sort of embarrassment that the new Jew, the Israel Jew, would have about the meek Golus Jew who went like sheep to the slaughter. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising would be the one ray of light in the darkness of the meek Golus Jew going like sheep to the slaughter. And it was a statement, and a statement which was being made, and a statement which was rejected by many. It remains. There's a Holocaust Memorial Day on the 27th of Nisan. That's the national day of commemoration. It has evolved and been tempered. There was another movement, the Yom HaKadish HaKlali, what is now the Yom HaKadish HaKlali, but was presented by the chief rabbinate as a day which would be Asara B'Teves, the 10th of Teves, which is already a fast day. And to add to the Asara B'Teves, to make that Holocaust Memorial Day. It has evolved today, and already for a long time, what they call the General Day of Kaddish, which is for the many people who had relatives who died in the Holocaust and they don't know when their yortzeit is, they have no clue when they died, so many say Kaddish on Asara B'Teves. In all of this, Gedolei Yisrael were asked as well what to do, what should be done. And the Chazon Ish demurred, did not want to do anything. Chazon Ish cared about the Holocaust. Chazon Ish lost brothers in the Holocaust. He got out, so to speak, by the skin of his teeth. Nobody who commemorated the Holocaust was more sensitive to the loss than the Chazon Ish, but the Chazon Ish was hard-hearted and didn't want it. Listen to what the Chazon Ish wrote. Inyonei halacha kivuim heim al pi haTorah, sheikron b'ksav u'beirushan b'Torah shebal peh. Matters of halacha are established according to the Torah, the written Torah, the explanation through the Torah shebal peh. Even a prophet is not allowed to create a new law until he finds a basis in the Torah. And the same way, taking away a mitzvah is a deviation from the Torah. Adding a mitzvah is also a deviation from the Torah. According to this principle, one needs to ask a shelas chacham. One has to ask a pure halachic question. Should we observe 7 days of mourning for the tzaros, for the terrible tzaros? There was actually a national shiva period which was observed, instituted after the Holocaust, when Eretz Yisrael sat shiva. It wasn't a full shiva in the full sense of the word, but people came home from work early, whatever. It was a whole thing, a national shiva. He says this is a halachic question. Im chayavim, if it's an obligation to do this, in tzarech haskamas, you don't need approval from anybody. This is what halacha says. Im turim, if you're free from doing it, anu muzharim linag miptur zem nishat Torah b'batrasan. He says, so then we shouldn't be doing it because the Torah says we're not supposed to do. We don't do it. And he says, Hinei shemaya mizevach taiv. He quoted what the Navi said. Shmuel said to Shaul, "You want to bring a korban. You said you spared some of the sheep and cattle from Amalek because you wanted to bring a nice korban." Hashem told you He doesn't want the korban. He wants you to listen. So we're going to say we came up with a beautiful idea to commemorate, but Hashem told us how to observe. Hashem told us how to observe. And the proposal that we should get together the sages and establish something, to make a decree and to uphold it, he says this is a lightheadedness relative to the halacha. It should be taken off the table before things go any further. Establishing a fast day for the generations, it's a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. What we have from the times yet of prophecy. How can we dare, wrote the Chazon Ish, a generation that tovle hashtika, that for us it would be better to be silent, to even contemplate this, to establish things for the generations. This proposal seems to demonstrate that we are in denial of the humble station which we have in life, of who we really are. It's very clear from the Chazon Ish, and again, this could be a much longer discussion. It's going to be a short discussion. It's very clear from the Chazon Ish that what he was worried about was the same things that we talked about in the previous segment. He was living in a time where there was a state with a rabbinate, and there was a movement on many different fronts to create different religious new things as part of this new phenomenon. I mean, it is totally new what we're experiencing today. The Jewish people are back in their land. What are we supposed to do? How do we do this? How do we celebrate independence? How do we celebrate the freedom of Yerushalayim? How do we commemorate the Holocaust? How do we make the laws of inheritance? How do we run public transportation? How do we do everything? And, you know, at this time there was a movement maybe to renew the Sanhedrin. And the Chazon Ish was so wary about a government rabbinate. He knew that people established fast days in the time of the Vad Arba Arotzos, the Council of the Four Lands. The 20th of Sivan was a fast day established for a region for a period of time. There's plenty of precedent. But he was worried about the readiness that here we are, we're back in the Jewish state, we can make our new laws. And he wanted fidelity to the past. He wanted fidelity to the truth of Torah. It could be said, you know, we talked about this once here not so long ago. If you look at the statements and the writings of Rabbi Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik of Boston, who was the head of the Mizrahi, he had the identical problem. He was opposed to even writing a kinnah, even writing a special lament for Tishe B'Av. He said when he reads the kinnah about Spire and Mayence and Worms, he thinks about Vilna and about Poltava, and he thinks about all those different places. That's what he thinks about. Who has the ability? And he was a strict halachist. He says everything has to be done following halachic form. There's no such thing, said Rav Yoshe Ber, as just nice symbolic acts which make us feel right. But in the Chazon Ish's view, etc., especially, it was part of this hesitation about a readiness to draft a new Torah. And while nobody would say that adding a day of observance of the Holocaust is, quote unquote, in the realm of a new Torah, like rewriting and so on and so forth, but the humility of readiness for change and legislation at a time when the definition of what it meant to be a Jew was so in flux. That's what the Chazon Ish went against. There's a beautiful epilogue which I would like to give to this, for which I would give credit to a person named Aryeh Edrei, who wrote a paper, academic paper on this, and in turn give credit to Professor Brown, who deserves a lot of credit, who brought this to my attention. In the book, he brings it to attention, a beautiful postscript to this. They make it into a larger thesis, which has truth to it, absolutely. I don't know if it was what figured. On the 11th of Teves, 1949, the day after the 10th of Teves, the first 10th of Teves that was established by the rabbinate as the day of commemoration for the Holocaust. Okay, you understand? This is the 10th of Teves, 1949. The state was founded in 1948. They established the 10th of Tevis as a Memorial Day. This was the first 10th of Tevis. On the 11th of Tevis, the Chazon Ish wrote a letter. I should have been more suspenseful. I should have waited to the end to tell you that it was on the 11th of Tevis. But you'll get it this way fine. On the 11th, the Chazon Ish wrote a letter. It's a letter, it's a haskama that a meshulach took with him. You know, maybe, I don't think it was laminated. Right? But it was a haskama that a meshulach took with him. It was a meshulach for the Slonomer Yeshiva that was developing then, I think, in Ramat Gan, right near Bnei Brak. Wrote the Chazon Ish. B'nei Avoda Rabas Erech Amalas Kvei Terasei Shlita. Says you're doing something very valuable. Lishtatef bivniyas batei midrasei shel Bavel al admas hakodesh. To participate in building the houses of study of Bavel on the holy soil of Eretz Yisrael. V'nei meis b'shanim shayeshivas. It's centuries that the yeshivas of Bavel have been wandering and traveling from place to place, waiting to get back to the land from which they were exiled. They were destroyed in Bavel, and they rebuilt in a different foreign land, in Spain, in France, in Germany. The names of the places changed, but the soul remained intact. This same Torah that has traveled in exile, 10 exiles, and that built its home in the land of Shinar, in the land of Bavel. He's paraphrasing the Gemara that speaks about how the Sanhedrin moved 10 different locations, and then to Bavel, and then went from Bavel to the lands of the West. This Torah that's returning now from the empty, desolate western lands to Eretz Yisrael, to the Holy Land that was given to our forefathers as their permanent inheritance. This land that was the home for the Torah when it came from Sinai to appear with its rays of light in the midst of the Jewish people. The Torah is coming home. It is dear to us to call this yeshiva the yeshiva of Slonim. This name reminds us of the strength of the Torah, of our strength, to hold tight to the tablets of the Torah through all of the difficult golios that we've gone through, and that have finally brought us back to the place from which we left. El Amnucha v'Anachla, to the resting place, to our eternal portion. In its beauty, Zohar Yafya, that all of the clouds of the exile have not dimmed its light, have not removed its taste. Yes, the shuls and the batei medrash of Bavel will in the future all be established here in Eretz Yisrael. That's what the Chazon Ish wrote. And the theory, which is a beautiful and fitting theory, is the Chazon Ish was also dedicated to Holocaust Memorial. But for him, Holocaust Memorial wasn't a day. It wasn't even a poem on Tishe B'Av. For him, Holocaust Memorial was taking that world of Torah that didn't start in Europe, but had found a home in Europe. A home that it had gotten to from other parts of Europe, from Spain and France, from Bavel, and originally from Eretz Yisrael. And to bring it back to life, yes, as Panovich, as Grodno, as Slonim, as Lomzhe, as Mir, show Rabbeinu Shalom. We held on to it all the way, and we brought it back, and we brought it back to its place. I said to you before, the Chazon Ish doesn't write a lot, speak a lot about in redemptive terms. In this letter he does. In this letter he does.
And Motzoi, Asara B'Teva, somebody came to him and asked him for a letter for Slonim. And all he could think of was, how are we remembering the Holocaust? We're rebuilding it. That's the final note that I want to share with you from the Chazon Ish. We learned many things. I hope we traveled back to the world of the Chazon Ish, to a purer world, to a simpler world, to a world where the truth of Torah is what's pursued, where kindness and goodness and simplicity of life is what makes the magic of the Jewish people. We're cherishing every Jewish child as another star for the world of faith and for the world of the Torah, building them up one by one, preserving a true Torah in Zion, and at the same time understanding a world of people who are so far away, appreciating and understanding and just trying to do whatever we can that will advance and strengthen the cause of Torah. Because that's what we have to do in Golus. We have to hold on to the Torah that we took with us and make sure it gets back to its rightful geographic location and to be that which stands up to the highest position, the purest position. So before we recite our Kinnos for the Holocaust, on this last note of the Chazon Ish, seeing the restoration which we're privileged to see in our time, he himself seeing it as the Torah coming home to its place, we'll sing together as we always do the Animam Bevias HaMoshiach of the Skolena Rebbe of the Holocaust, the one that's associated with the Holocaust. And then we will recite the Kinnos of the Baba Rebbe, which we have on loose papers, before we stand up for Elit Zion. Ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin. Hay be'yemuna sheleima bevias HaMoshiach, bevias HaMoshiach ani ma'amin. Hoy bevias HaMoshiach, bevias HaMoshiach ani ma'amin. Hoy ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin, hoy ani ma'amin. Hoy be'yemuna sheleima, hoy bevias HaMoshiach, bevias HaMoshiach ani ma'amin. Ve'af al pi sheyismameya im kol ze ani ma'amin. Ve'af al pi sheyismameya im kol ze ani ma'amin. The Kinnos of the Baba Rebbe can be found on your loose sheets of paper, the one-sided sheet, or on page 384 in the art scroll Kinnos. Kinnos for the Holocaust. Zichruna v'chainenu kol Yisrael kolchem yishama barama kishmido Germanu es ameinu b'meizam hamilchama b'misais b'shunais achzariyos b'rav v'atzama אל תשכחו בכל הדיירס, עדי תזכו לירס בנחמות, הקוסם ובחייסיהם צפופים וסגורים בקריינים, כצוין לטבח יובלו, לשריפה בכבשיינים. כל שבוע מי זוכר תמיד לפני שכם, יעיינים מקרם שמע ישראל, ומסרו נפשם, אדוני אדונים. שישיבה עץ וסלמידיהם, אמיני עמך שמה. העבירו מינויים קשים, הרגו מיד, רמודים ילדים רכים, צועקים אליך מן האדמה, נקיים נקמצת ונושים, לא יצחיה כל נשמה. על שפיפס אלפי מדרשויס ולתך נסיועיס, רבבי ספרי תורה ולמדה, נקיינים בישייס, שלחו באש מקדשי אל, היציסו, ואיננו צייפייס, ישלם המעביר סבי רדים מגעים עלי גבייס, עקו שמיים ואדמה, אלפי הירויס פרסרי תורה, ארצוי סירו פה, כי לא יסר, נחלאים מקיימים מסיירות, צדיקים זקנים החסידים, וכי אמונה תהירה, מיים גלינו מארצנו, לא היה חזק, כי לא יהיה נראה. רחם על שיריסנו, רבינו משמיים, למחנויס הקדושים פי 10, כי יוצא מצרים, קיימים בייס קודשנו, ונחמנו בכפליים. רוממנו ואבינו לציון ירושלים. Could rise for Eli Tzion, which is the end of the book, Mem Hey 390 in the art scroll, the end of the paperback books. Eli Tzion v'yoreha kema isha b'tzireha v'chibsu lach hagurasa al bal nureha alei armoin asher nutash v'yashmastein adoreha v'yal v'yas mechor fe'yel v'soich migdash chadoreho alei golus mishor se'yel manimei shir zmoreho v'yal dama masher shupach kimoi meimei yoireho alei hegyoin v'choileho asher domam biyoreho v'yalvad asher shomeim uvitol sanhedreho alei zivchei simideho ufidyoinei b'chayreho v'yal chilul kilei heichol umizbach kitoireho alei tapei melocheho b'nei david gevireho v'yal yofyom asher choshach v'yesaru kisoreho alei chavoid asher golo v'yes churban devireho v'yal loichetz asher lochatz v'som sakim chagureho alei machatz v'roiv makois asher huku nezireho v'yal niputz alei selah oilo leho unyoreho alei simcha soiveho sochaku al shivoreho v'yalinui b'nei chayrin nediveho tehayreho alei pesha asher ifso silul derech ashureho v'yal tzivois keholeho shizufeho shechayreho alei koilois mechorefeho v'yeis rabu fegoreho V'al rigshas megadfeho, v'soich mishkan chatzereho, alei shimcho asher chulal, b'fi komei mitzireho, v'al tachan yitzav chuloch, כשוי ושמע אמורהו אלי ציון ויורהו כמו אישה וצירהו וחיפשו לו חגור עסק על בעל נעורהו אשרי יושבי ביסךו ידיעה ולכו סבו